Nothing is evil in the beginning.
Hey, welcome back to Screen Crush. I'm Colton Ogburn, and this is a complete breakdown of Rings of Power Season 1. We are giving you all the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in every single episode from the first season. Our very own Ryan Airy and friend of the channel, Brian Siliman, will be taking you through this very in-depth breakdown of the entire first season of Rings of Power. So, whip up some second breakfast, sit back, and enjoy.
First and foremost, you may be wondering which of J.R.R. Tolkien's books provide the basis for this series.
Did they take the lore from the Silmarillion, or possibly the Unfinished Tales?
Neither, Doug. Amazon doesn't have the rights to either of those books. They only have the rights to The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit.
So how is this show able to access that lore?
Well, Tolkien ran down the general events of the first and second ages of Middle-earth in the lengthy appendices that can be found at the end of Return of the King. This series uses that as a template, and a lot of lore has been invented by the makers of this series. That invented lore, for the most part, fills in the gaps that Tolkien left open-ended. We begin with Galadriel as we did in the movie The Lord of the Rings: The Fellowship of the Ring.
Much that once was is lost.
Now, it's fitting that we begin once more with Galadriel's voice in the dark.
Nothing is evil in the beginning.
Played by Cate Blanchett in Jackson's movies, the eventual Lady of Lorien is mostly played here by Morfydd Clark. Though Galadriel plays a part in Tolkien's first and second ages, she's hardly a lead character. However, she is a touchstone character that modern audiences are already familiar with, and she's a character that Amazon has the rights to. So it makes sense that she provides our new entry into this new story. Though there's nothing evil in the beginning, the series shows us many instances of decay, with evil slowly taking root as well as evil laying dormant and waiting to strike. It's the first age, and we haven't even gone to Middle-earth yet. We're in Valinor, which is where the Valar, that's the gods of Tolkien's work, first took form and set down roots. It's where the elves were first created, and it's sometimes referred to as the Undying Lands. Whenever we see elves departing Middle-earth on ships, this is the land that they are returning to. At the end of Return of the King, Galadriel, Gandalf, and Elrond all take one of these ships to Valinor. Because of their importance in the events of the Third Age, Bilbo Baggins is permitted to go, and so is Frodo Baggins. In Tolkien's lore, Elvenlord and Galadriel's husband Celeborn eventually follows. Now, at the very end of his long and wonderful life, Samwise Gamgee is permitted to take one of the last ships to Valinor. Aside from the fact that the One Ring would have never been destroyed without him, he technically was a ring bearer for a short amount of time. This is where the elves began, and it is where they return. Every now and then, a special exception is made for a non-elf to make this journey.
Would I be invited?
Of course you would, buddy. Now, because of this, ships and ship imagery are a big deal for the elves, and so is the sea. In the Third Age, Galadriel would warn Legolas of the call of the sea, and he himself hears its call beckoning him later on. Elrond makes it clear what the call of the sea is in the Return of the King movie, saying to Bilbo, as I said, Valinor is the ultimate home of all elves, a blessed, heaven-like realm.
Yarkan Ven Namar.
Young Galadriel is seen making a little paper boat, one that becomes a swan-shaped ship.
Not going to float. It's going to sail.
This is a sign of how Galadriel herself will blossom into a more powerful being. Also, most elvish ships take a similar shape. The ship that Galadriel leaves on in Return of the King does, as does this little skiff that she rides on in Fellowship. This episode itself features a ship of similar design. Other young elves throw rocks at Galadriel's little paper boat, eventually sinking it. Now, this symbolizes the constant infighting of the elves during this time. They were rarely at peace with one another, with the various houses of elves often vying for power and control. It's about as close to getting into the Silmarillion territory as this show can go. Galadriel's paper boat being sunk and going underwater may also be a harbinger of her jumping ship towards the end of the episode. The show doesn't name Galadriel's brother, but he is almost certainly Finrod of House Finarfin. His wisdom about the difference between a stone and a ship is something Galadriel turns into a way of life. The stone succumbs to the darkness, but the ship looks up. It might be tempted by the darkness, but it looks to the light. It thinks of things that the darkness can never know. Has Galadriel ever been tempted by the darkness? Well, she will be later on in life, that's for sure. As for things that the darkness can never truly conceive of, try kindness and small acts of love, something that Gandalf tells Galadriel in the first Hobbit film.
Simple acts of kindness and love.
That's really the entire basis for Gandalf's Fool's Hope, and it turned out just fine. Now, like Galadriel, Finrod is an elf of Noldor. In Tolkien's writing, he played a much larger role in the First Age than Galadriel did. He was close with both the dwarves and the men once he came to Middle-earth, and he founded the kingdom of Nargothrond. His skill at carving out this location earned him the surname Felagund from the dwarves, which means hewer of caves. He had a friendship with Barahir of the House Beor, and he gave him a ring after Barahir saved his life. Now that ring became an heirloom of that house, eventually winding up with Aragorn. The ring of Barahir is how Saruman was able to identify who Aragorn was in the Two Towers movie.
Ring of Barahir. So Gandalf Greyheim thinks he has found Isildur's heir.
Finrod battled Sauron personally in the First Age, and Sauron prevailed. Finrod perished while saving Beren, the son of Barahir. Now Beren is a First Age legend in his own right, a man who earned the great love of the elf Luthien Tinuviel. Now Beren and Luthien were a man and an elf that fell in love, so naturally both Aragorn and Arwen reference them ages later. So when Galadriel asks her brother about how she can know which lights to follow, he whispers in her ear. Now we don't yet know what he says, but this entire conversation about deciding for yourself, as well as Finrod saying he'll not always be there, immediately made us think of something that Frodo once asked Gandalf.
Who then do I trust?
You must trust yourself. Trust your own strength.
Finrod references his and Galadriel's parents, and though the show doesn't name them, they were named Finarfin and Eowyn. The two trees that we see in Valinor are Laurelin, the gold tree, and Telperion, the silver tree. They were both poisoned by the fallen Valar Melkor and the giant spider Ungoliant. Melkor eventually became Sauron's boss, renamed Morgoth, and Ungoliant spawned all of the evil spiders seen in the rest of Tolkien's work, including Shelob. The trees couldn't be salvaged, so the Valar harvested what they could. Telperion's last flower became the moon, and Laurelin's last fruit became the sun. It was said that following this event, the true light of the trees could only ever be seen in the Cimmerals. These are the beautiful shining gems of the First Age. Now, there was a Valar known as Yavanna who did create a second version of Telperion, and the seedlings of that tree eventually find its way through the lore all the way to Gondor in the Third Age. The white tree of Minas Tirith is its descendant. In the movies, the health of the tree symbolizes the health of Gondor and the king's potential return.
They guard it because they have hope. Faint and fading hope that one day it will flower. The king will come.
But in the book, the tree is dead. Gandalf and Aragorn have to take a journey out to find a lost seedling so that another tree in the same line can grow. We do see something dark and sinister spreading throughout the trees, and this could be a reference to Melkor and Ungoliant's poison. There are other moments in the episode where a similar poison is shown. A leaf becomes corrupted in a similar way, foreshadowing the doom ahead, and then we have a black bile pouring out of a cow's udder. Evil has been lying in wait, but the poison has been released. So, the show skips Melkor and just makes him Morgoth from the outset. He finishes off the trees and flees to launch havoc on a place Galadriel calls Middle-earth, one that she tells us has
Strange creatures beyond count.
So we've heard that before.
Middle-earth being, after all, full of strange creatures beyond count.
The elves proceed to follow Morgoth en masse, which turns into a complete truncation of the back and forth travel that the elves did in this age. It involved, as I've said, a great deal of elvish infighting. I mean, the broad strokes are there throughout. The elves got to Middle-earth and went to war with Morgoth. The brief scene of the War of the Wrath that the series shows us is a fleeting glimpse of the size and enormity of this conflict. It makes the War of the Ring look like something out of a lesser Real Housewives episode.
But it is not this day!
Camille's rage and getting me!
We do see several dragons, and one of them is likely Calagon the Black, the largest dragon to ever exist. He was bred personally by Morgoth, and with a host of fire drakes behind him, and Calagon personally drove the Valar themselves back when they eventually got involved personally. Now, Morgoth's use of Calagon was likely remembered by the Valar and the Mayor, that's the wizards in Middle-earth, and therefore it would be remembered by Gandalf. This would be why he has a much larger concern about Smaug in the time of The Hobbit.
A dragon could be used to terrible effect.
So, what took an age for Tolkien takes seconds for the series, but Galadriel does tell us that the war lasted for centuries and
Left Middle-earth in ruin.
the elves of this show didn't have a word for death, but now they have many. Morgoth is defeated, but his orcs are spread to all corners of the land, led by his most loyal lieutenant, the cruel and cunning Sauron.
They called him Sauron.
The design of Sauron is mostly in line with what we see of him in the Fellowship of the Ring. Finrod dies trying to destroy Sauron, which tracks with Finrod's history that we mentioned earlier. Galadriel assumes responsibility for her brother's quest.
His vow became mine. mine.
Sauron killed her brother, so now this is personal. She takes her brother's knife as a physical symbol of her vow. A mark is left on Finrod's body, and this is the first of many times we'll see this symbol in this episode. Tolkien wrote that even though Finrod's mortal body perished in Middle-earth, he reincarnated and came back to life in Valinor, where he remained until the end of his days. That's not in the show, but it's nice to know.
I feel better about all of this.
Galadriel's quest to find Sauron goes on for a long time.
Year gave way to year. Century gave way to century.
She sums up the time as only Galadriel can.
History became legend. Legend became myth.
Most of the elves now believe that Sauron is gone for good, and Galadriel has to fight that complacency. It's not the first time in her life that she'll do this. It's not even the first time in this episode. She knows that Sauron is patient and proficient with a slow and poisonous needle. Before you even know anything is wrong, your leaves are rotting and your cow is sick. Galadriel eventually winds up at Forodwaith, the frozen area in the northernmost waste that was greatly affected by the evil cold of Morgoth. In the Unfinished Tales, Tolkien wrote about the men who lived in this area, that they could slide on the ice by tying bones to their feet. And that's one way to win the gold. Galadriel is depicted as an armor-clad commander, which seems like a departure, but is supported by Tolkien. He described her as looking on things with the eye of a commander. But more than that, he wrote about her leading armies personally on more than one occasion. She is even described by him as a warrior and an Amazon in the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien. So this depiction is nowhere near as far-fetched as it may initially seem. She is never convinced that the evil of Morgoth is gone, and the evil code of Forodwaith supports her belief. She's not convinced that Sauron is gone either, and neither is Gandalf much later in the Third Age. This is likely why the White Council scene in the first Hobbit movie shows her supporting Gandalf when he's trying to fight the complacency of Saruman.
Always you must meddle, looking for trouble where none exists.
Let him speak.
Now, though the chainmail she wears is not exactly cheery, it is adorned with little golden stars which remind her and us to look to the light. The light of the stars is sacred to all elves, but this could also represent the fight against the fallen stars of Morgoth and Sauron. It could also foreshadow the star that comes zooming in at the end of the episode. The design of the swords that Galadriel's small company use are also familiar, as their lengths and handles make us recall Narsi, eventually reforged as Anduril and wielded by Aragorn. The stronghold that they find looks a lot like Sauron's auxiliary fortress of Dol Guldur, seen in the Hobbit trilogy. Within, the elves are affected by the cold remnants of Morgoth's magic. Galadriel briefly sees her own reflection in ice, which references a different mirror that Galadriel would later use in Fellowship.
Will you look into the mirror?
What will I see?
Even the wisest cannot tell.
Another Fellowship connection follows as one of Galadriel's company asks,
"What devilry is this?"
We instantly thought of Boromir in a similar line.
What is this new devilry?
Galadriel determines that the magic at play has something to do with this unseen world, which in Tolkien's writing is a plane which contains creatures and beings having to do with magic. The ring wraiths are of the unseen world, and the powers of the One Ring are tied to it as well. Whatever research was being done in this fortress could very well have to do with the magic that creates the 9 rings for mortal men, which resulted in the creation of the ring wraiths and could also potentially be related to the craft behind the One Ring itself. If we need proof that Sauron was involved in whatever was going on here, Galadriel finds it. Despite the evil cold, a metal surface that looks an awful lot like an anvil still burns hot. When touched with water, the eye of Sauron is seen once more, this time burning with fire. It's similar to this truth about the One Ring.
A secret now that only fire can tell.
All Galadriel knows right now is that Sauron was here, and even though the mark is centuries old, he's probably now somewhere else.
Gathering strength, perfecting whatever dark art eluded him here.
So Galadriel's followers aren't as committed as she is, and they long to go home. Now, so does she, but she's not talking about the same place they are. She describes still feeling the light of the trees, so the home she speaks of is Valinor.
Every trace of our enemy is vanquished. I can never return.
Morgoth, his orcs, and Sauron all have to be confirmed dead before she'll return home, even though she'd probably love to cut bait and go back right now. And we know this isn't going to happen anytime soon because it's going to take a long time for Sauron to be defeated. But once he is, she does indeed get to return. But that's at least an age away, so
Not yet.
The fight with the snow troll reminded us of this. in more than one way. Not least was Galadriel running up a sword to the troll's back, just like Legolas ran up a chain. The design of the elven bows is familiar too, as they remind us of Haldir's noble contingent of archers from this scene in the Two Towers. Galadriel pulls another Legolas move when she finishes the troll off with her brother's knife. Big map flyovers are a staple of the movies.
Bag End, Bagshot Row, Hobbiton, Westfarthing, the Shire.
So naturally they continue to be used on this series. Our first map stop is Rhovanion. This is an area that the river Anduin flows through and encompasses much of the Greenwood. That's the great forest that would eventually become Mirkwood, which we saw in The Hobbit. Two men with big moose antlers on their back pass through, and they're on guard against dangerous creatures called Harfoots. And once they're gone, the Harfoots start to pop out of the grass and the trees and everywhere else.
Hobbits?
Close, but not quite, Doug. These folk haven't yet taken that name. Harfoots are one of the three breeds of halfling, the other being Stores and the Falahides. There's almost nothing relating to hobbits or Harfoots in Tolkien's writing about the Second Age. They came to prominence in the Third Age, when the Harfoots settled what would become the Shire.
And yes, no doubt to others our ways seem quaint.
Along with the Falahides and some of the Stores. It bears mentioning that many Stores were river folk staying close to the Anduin. Countless years after the One Ring is lost, one particular Store hobbit named Deagle finds it. Deagle's cousin and best friend, another Store, murders him and takes it. That Store went by the name Smeagol, also known as Gollum. The Harfoots are adept at burrowing into the ground like the hobbits will eventually do, but they are far more earthy. They're almost like hobbits, crossed with a bit of the Fae and a smattering of the Gelfling from the Dark Crystal. They are very wary of the big folk who pass by. They may start here,
Clear.
but they'll eventually get here.
You bow to no one.
The Harfoots have a mysticism about them that the hobbits do not have later on, most of it provided by Sadok Burrows, who tries to interpret the appearance of the Hunters. It should be noted that he is played by the legendary Lenny Henry, who recently voiced the character of Martin Tinbones in The Sandman. All of the Harfoot characters have been completely invented for this show. Eleanor Nori Brandyfoot comes close to being tookish in nature.
Fool of a took.
As she is adventurous and doesn't ask for permission. The name Brandyfoot is also a cross between familiar hobbit names Brandybuck and Proudfoot. And the nickname Nori is the same as one of the dwarves in the company of Thorin Oakenshield in The Hobbit. When a friend tells Nori that they aren't supposed to be out this far, she has a very tookish response.
If we didn't do everything we weren't supposed to do, we'd hardly do anything at all.
She's not as wary as Samwise Gamgee is about going out too far.
If I take one more step, it'll be the farthest away from home I've ever been.
Just like the hobbits, the Harfoots enjoy living off the land, dancing around, and living their peaceful life. But they aren't immune to the dangers of Middle-earth, as they have yet to settle the protected borders of the Shire. An appearance of what looks to be a warg lets us know why they are told to not venture too far off. We then meet the familiar Elrond, played by Hugo Weaving in the movies, but is now played by Robert Aramayo, who appeared as the young Ned Stark in Game of Thrones. He's addressed as Herald Elrond because he is the herald of the High King Gil-galad, who we see fighting in the Battle of the Last Alliance in the Fellowship prologue. Remember that Elrond was there too. Here we find him writing in a familiar Elvish script used by both Tolkien himself and in the movies. He's told that he is not invited to a council meeting, which is ironic given that Elrond will be summoning his own councils in an age or so.
Friends of old, you've been summoned here to answer the threat of Mordor.
He's told that this session is for elf lords only, which may be a dig at Elrond's half-elven status, so this takes place in Lindon, the capital city of the High Elves in this period. The design of Lindon is similar to both the designs of Lothlorien and Rivendell in the movies, though in this time period neither location has even been built. In front of a mural depicting ships crossing back to Valinor, Elrond meets with Galadriel, who is no longer in her armor. Not only are these two friends, they eventually become family in Tolkien's writing. Elrond marries Celebrian, a daughter of Galadriel and Celeborn. Among the children he has with her is, of course, Arwen.
I would rather share one lifetime with you than face all the ages of this world alone.
Now, it doesn't seem like any of this has happened yet, so maybe this series will show us little baby Arwen. Elrond talks to Galadriel and elf-splains the mural.
Here it said that when you cross over, you hear a song.
which may echo the call of the sea notion that we previously spoke of. What Elrond has heard of this crossing will be proved true by the end of this episode, as the call to home is strong. The imagery is different, but it's a similar sentiment to the lyrics of Into the West, which ended Return of the King. Gandalf's words to Pippin during the Siege of Gondor also come to mind.
No, the journey doesn't end here.
Now, speaking of Gandalf, Galadriel's connection to him is drawn even further here. Elrond half expected Galadriel to arrive caked in grime, and he gives a similar dig to Gandalf in the first Hobbit movie.
Not really dressed for dinner.
You never are.
Gandalf has always been a field man, and Galadriel has now proven herself a field elf. Also, like Gandalf, Galadriel is ready to go out again as soon as possible, prompting Elrond to reply,
"You have only just arrived."
He sounds like Frodo Baggins.
You've only just arrived.
When Elrond presses Galadriel for details on her journey, she remarks that,
"You really have become a politician."
And she's more right than she knows, as we'll come to find out by episode's end. Galadriel has more in common with Nori Brandyfoot than one might think, as both of them defy orders and go as far as they think they must. Galadriel is now consumed with the quest to find Sauron, and has no problems going against Gil-galad's orders to do what needs to be done. The only consequence for Nori is that she missed the sighting of the hunters, and her father's advice to her is to stay close to home so she doesn't miss anything. It's the reverse of Bilbo Baggins, because if he'd stayed close to home, he would have missed quite a lot. Instead,
I'm going on an adventure!
Nori, more than any of the other Harfoots, definitely has some Took instincts inside of her. She wants to go out and see what wonders the world has in store, danger be damned.
Haven't you ever wondered what else is out there? How far the river flows, or where the sparrows learn the new songs they sing in spring?
Her mother lists off the various races of Middle-earth and what they have to worry about, including dwarves, and she includes trees on this list. They have to worry about the soil beneath their roots, and this could be a reference to the Horns, Ents, or both.
My business is with Isengard tonight.
She adds that they are safe because they have each other, and that's a Hobbit sentiment if I ever heard one.
I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you!
Gil-galad celebrates Galadriel and her warriors, saying that their search has proven that Sauron is gone and that the days of war are over. After a familiar close-up of Galadriel's eyes, he tells the group that they will receive a great honor. They will be allowed to take a ship from the Grey Havens and depart for Valinor. Galadriel is going to truly go home, and everyone is happy except for her. Her mission is far from over, and she knows it. A fireworks celebration that night doesn't really hold a candle to what Gandalf would do. Elrond tells her that getting to leave is a gift, which echoes Tolkien's writing in Return of the King, when Arwen passes this gift to Frodo. Galadriel rejects the gift here for different reasons, but it mirrors the choice that her granddaughter, and Elrond's daughter, will one day make. When Elrond says that no one has ever refused the call before, he has no idea what's to come. And this isn't the first time that Elrond will be convincing someone to change their mind and get on a boat.
I have made my choice.
Now, he tells her that he's shown the sigil that Galadriel found to Gil-galad, but neither of them think that it's a big deal. They think that she is conflicted, and she remarks,
"I am grateful you have not known evil as I have."
Now, that line will soon prove pivotal to her journey. Already, Galadriel is the one who has seen the Eye.
One who has seen the Eye.
The scene is ultimately a spin on what Elrond will tell Aragorn in the Two Towers. If Arwen takes the ship, she will carry her love for Aragorn to the Undying Lands, and there it will be evergreen.
Let her go. Let her take the ship into the west. Let her bear away her love for you to the Undying Lands. There it will be evergreen.
Here, Galadriel argues that if she takes this unfinished business with her, this evil, that will be evergreen as well. It could poison Valinor, just as Middle-earth has become poisoned. As he does with Arwen in the Two Towers movie, Elrond is able to convince Galadriel to take the ship. The magic map then takes us to the final group of characters in this episode's puzzle as we go to the Southlands and enter the world of men. Now, elves are stationed nearby, so they come to check on these people regularly to make sure that they're still in line. The Elvish Watch Warden believes that there is still wickedness in them. The elf Arondir checks things out in a tavern, worried about something in the east and the returning motif of things being poisoned. These people have no love for elves, and a charming young man calls him Knife Ears before reminding him that they aren't the same men who cause so much trouble.
Oh, let it go, Knife Ears.
The lot you lump us in with died off 1,000 years ago.
Arondir meets with his human crush of Bronwyn, a healer who gifts him with Alfiran seeds. She uses them in healing, but in Tolkien's writing the name itself translates to immortal from the Sindarish elves. It's a flower that Legolas sings of once, liken it to a golden bell. Bronwyn asks if elves have healers, and they do. According to Arondir, they call them artificers. Because elves mostly heal themselves, it is the job of the artificer to render hidden truths as works of beauty. Tolkien wrote of the elf Idris, who once possessed a magical green gem that could grant healing powers. Someone's got to make those donuts, and perhaps it's the job of an artificer. The elf Celebrimbor has been described by Tolkien as an artificer, so file that knowledge away for later. In a surprise to absolutely no one, we find out that Arondir has the hots for Bronwyn. We're told that only twice before has the union between an elf and human ever been attempted.
Here are those two.
Well, the show doesn't tell us, but that's why you got us. I've already mentioned the famous Beren and Luthien, but the second couple referred to here is Tuor and Idril. They are involved in the fall of Gondolin, which takes place in the First Age. Aragorn and Arwen would go on to be the third couple, but that hasn't happened yet. Some don't even count them because Arwen chose a mortal life, but by that logic you'd have trouble with Beren and Luthien too. We're going to count all of them. Arondir and his company get word from Gil-galad that the troubles are over and they don't have to keep their watch anymore. They're all being called back. Much like the defiance of both Galadriel and Nori Brandyfoot, Arondir goes to see Bronwyn anyways. They get a good look at the sickened cow who wandered east, and black bile pours out of it. Now while they venture off to investigate, Bronwyn's son gets flack about his father who disappeared while he snoops around for an artifact that he saw. He finds it, and it's the broken hilt of a sword. For one thing, it looks like the evil version of the Shards of Narsil.
Shards of Narsil?
For another, it has the Eye of Sauron on it, obviously infused with evil, and the sigil flames up when the boy looks at it. The evil sigil is beginning to act similarly to the objects that Sauron has touched or corrupted in the movies. It turns out that Elrond and Gil-galad sent Galadriel away on purpose, with Elrond being every bit the politician that Galadriel said he was. They're worried that he would unleash the very evil that she hoped to destroy.
For the same wind that seeks to blow out a fire may also cause its spread.
Gil-galad is under no illusions that Sauron is gone. In fact, quite the contrary. He has a plan, as he and Elrond are the leaders facing a new sunrise. His plan with dealing for Sauron? Lord Celebrimbor, the greatest of the elven smiths. Elrond is told that he's to work with him on a new project. Well done, Gil-galad. Send Galadriel away and give Celebrimbor a grant. Elrond looks a little wary here, and that wariness will only grow until he arrives at this point.
Destroy it!
Galadriel and her warriors have their weapons and armor taken from them, signaling that they can lay down their burdens and prepare for a life of peace. They are stripped down to their underclothes as if they are about to be reborn. Galadriel lets it all go, save for her brother's dagger. She grasps onto this symbol of her vow to take up Finrod's quest before ultimately surrendering it. She hears the call of the sea, but then remembers what her brother whispered to her about the stones and ships, and how to know what lights to follow. And this time, we get to hear his words.
Sometimes we cannot know until we have touched the darkness.
A star falls and blazes across the sky. Every character we've met sees it, and what looks like a pair of Ents witness it too. The star lands near the Harfoots, right as Galadriel jumps off the boat and hits the water, making it seem like they are linked in some way. A leaf falls in Lindon, and a dark corruption is spreading through it. Evil is indeed spreading, but light will theoretically rise to meet it. Nori investigates the giant crater, and there is a naked man at the center of it. He is discovered by the proto-hobbits, Harfoots. Gandalf has a strong attachment to hobbits all across the lore, seeing value and potential in them when no one else does. Gandalf feels more at home in the Shire than anywhere else, and let's remember that the Harfoots are the ones who will eventually settle the Shire. They would be his first family. Harfoots being the ones to find him is almost irresistible. For halflings to be the first denizens of Middle-earth that Gandalf gets to know would honor their bond in a powerful way. So the raging Tolkien purist in us rages at this potential change, but we gotta admit, we don't hate it. We think that we might even like it. Either way, Gandalf himself is the one to perfectly describe the situation at the episode's end.
The board is set. The pieces are moving.
The title sequence features several familiar symbols. Rings, of course, are dominant, and so are the two trees of Valinor. Now remember, we saw these two trees in the first episode, where they provided all the light in the world before they were destroyed by Morgoth and his giant spider friend. The straight-edged architecture and jewel design of the dwarves is also represented in this opening sequence, and some symbols get wavy and perverted, which could represent the design of the orcs. At one point, a dark shape slithers its way in, symbolizing Sauron and his persisting evil that slowly poisons all of the other races. So, because this episode goes back and forth between so many stories, we're going to talk about each story separately. Who's up first, Doug?
Harfoots and the Stranger.
You got it. Our main Harfoot hero, Nori Brandyfoot, examines the man in the crater. Instead of arriving by ship, he falls like a fiery star sent from Valinor, which would track with who and what Gandalf actually is. So, the 5 wizards in Middle-earth are called the Istari, and they were all Maiar spirits. Kind of like the demigods of Middle-earth, for lack of a better way to put it. And they were in the service of the Valar in Valinor. The Valar are basically like gods or angels who serve the creator. Sauron himself was a Maiar, just like Gandalf, just as Morgoth used to be one of the Valar. 5 Maiar were given a mission and then placed into the bodies of old men so that they would remain humble. But that didn't stop one of the 5 wizards from finding a way to be a raging egomaniac.
But you had elected the way of pain!
Now the Maiar aren't really men at all, which is partially why Gandalf was able to be sent back to Middle-earth after his fall in Fellowship of the Ring. Because he joined with the enemy, Saruman did not receive the same treatment. He stayed dead. What you say? Because the wizards were sent specifically to counter Sauron, we're doubling down on the notion that it makes sense, as far as this series is concerned, for the Maiar to be sent now. Gandalf was the last to arrive originally, so the other 4 wizards may already be on the scene. Now none of them is as fiery as Gandalf is. The wizard who is proficient with fireworks might have arrived in Middle-earth as a firework. The stranger is surrounded by flames in this crater, and we immediately thought of Gandalf referring to himself as a servant of the secret fire.
I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Arnor.
Gandalf shows himself proficient with fire time and time again. And the stranger immediately shows Nori and her friend Poppy that he has some control over flame. There's another fairly large reason why Gandalf is directly connected to fire, but that involves one of the 3 elven rings, and this show has not introduced them yet. Now Nori is not just about to leave the stranger alone. She's going to help no matter what. The spirit of Frodo Baggins is very present.
What must I do?
Her best friend Poppy is more reluctant to get involved. She's not clear on how they're supposed to carry a giant back to the settlement.
How exactly are we supposed to carry a giant?
Now, while not referenced much in The Lord of the Rings, giants get a couple of references in the Book of the Hobbit, though it's mostly in the form of like folk hearsay. The storm giants of the Misty Mountains are seen in the first Hobbit movie.
Giants! Storm giants!
Sadak and the other Harfoot mystics are feeling danger, and one of the mystics suggests moving their entire camp. Now this reminds us that the Harfoots are nomadic and have no true home as of yet, until generations later they settle in the Shire. Having a deep love for their home is something that all hobbits will eventually appreciate.
See, that's where I belong. That's home.
They don't notice Nori and Poppy stealing lanterns like they're Merry and Pippin stealing fireworks. The 2 Harfoots can't figure out what race this stranger is. He's not a giant, he's not a troll, and he's not a man, and he doesn't have pointy ears, so he's not an elf. Nori points out that he's not a baby eagle with a broken wing, which could be a slight reference to how Gandalf originally earned the respect of the eagles in Tolkien's writing. He found and healed their leader, Gwahir, from a poisoned arrow. Nori Brandyfoot looks to be positioned as our leading Harfoot here, with Poppy backing her up in the kind of Samwise Gamgee position. They bicker more than Frodo and Sam, but that'll give Poppy room to grow. She notes that Nori isn't turning away from this. She can't, because even in these early times, these proto-hobbits are pure and can't help but do the right thing. Bilbo eventually accepts the call to adventure.
I'm going on an adventure!
And as we've said, Frodo accepts his mission immediately. They keep him a secret and they hide him away in a little hut like they're Elliot hiding E.T. In case we haven't already gotten the message, Nori tells Poppy that this is her responsibility.
It's like there's a reason this happened, like I was supposed to find him. Me.
Now she says this, making us think of what Gandalf will tell Frodo much later in the saga.
Bilbo was meant to find the ring, in which case you also were meant to have it.
Now to me, this is all spelling out to be divine intervention on the part of the Middle-earth gods. This is a Valar playing matchmaker with a Maiar and a Harfoot. The Harfoot duo want to keep him safe, much like Gandalf wanted Frodo to keep a certain ring safe.
Keep it secret. Keep it safe.
Now later on, the stranger makes markings on the ground and seems disturbed by the energy of Middle-earth itself. He hears what sounds like black speech and recognizes the corruption of Morgoth and the ongoing corruption of Sauron. He yells at Nori, and it immediately made us think of this.
Do not take me for some conjurer of cheap tricks.
Now Nori thinks that he doesn't remember his name, but we think it's because he doesn't have a name yet. If he is Gandalf, he hasn't assumed the moniker.
Gandalf? That was what they used to call me.
He's never been confined to a body before, so this is all very new and disorienting to him. Food also looks like it's a new thing for him too. Really just dives in there, doesn't he?
No, that's not how you...
Nori also asks if there are any others like him, and he starts scratching images and runes in the dirt. When he begins to speak odd words, he says the following. Now this could be a stretch, but it sounds like he's saying Olorin. Olorin is Gandalf's Maiar name. It would be the only name that he's ever known up to this point.
It's a stretch, but I like it.
I do too. While Nori's been trying to figure him out, her father Largo twists his ankle. Now, if the Harfoots migrate, he and the Brandyfoot family could be left behind. Nori now has to decide whether to continue helping the stranger or to go along with the other Harfoots. The stranger then provides a further connection to fire that night, showing that he has a bond with fireflies. He whispers to them in the way that Gandalf whispers to a moth in Fellowship. The fireflies align with certain stars, revealing a constellation that the stranger must find. So Nori has an idea of where he can find these stars, and so the potential quest of the Hobbit protagonist, much like Frodo and Bilbo, becomes clear. Now Poppy will likely go along, because when the fireflies go out, this doesn't sit well with her.
Nori?
And we think that the fireflies go out because of this ongoing corruption of nature that we see all throughout Middle-earth.
But first, let's talk about Elrond and the dwarves.
Thanks, Doug. We are introduced to Eregion, which is the realm of the Elven Smiths. It's a glorious elven city that is of a similar design to Lindon. Just as it is in Tolkien's writing, Celebrimbor is the ruler here. So this is where he's starting work on the special project that we heard about in the premiere. That project being the Rings of Power. According to Tolkien, it is in this realm that Celebrimbor will forge the 3 elven rings. Elrond. Okay, so in the last episode I slipped up. I said Elrond was half elven. Not 100% true. Elrond is the son of Arendelle and Elwig. Dior was one of his grandmothers and Idril was his other grandmother. Both of these unions of mortals and elves are in his family tree, so that's where the name half-elven comes from. Look, nobody's perfect. Elrond is now assisting Celebrimbor with his project, the specifics of which have not been revealed. But what is revealed is that a key artifact is kept within the city, Feanor's hammer, which was used to create the Silmarils. So Feanor was a major character in the Silmarillion book and a major player in the First Age. He's likely the greatest artificer in all of Tolkien's history. Galadriel is actually his niece. Feanor's finest work was creating the Silmarils. These are beautiful jewels of unmatched beauty, and they shone with the light of Lorelin and Teliperion. The Silmarils were his precious, and they were lusted after by more than any other object in the canon, equaled only by the One Ring. Celebrimbor tells Elrond that Morgoth stole the Silmarils, but he found them too beautiful to handle. As he says,
Feanor's work nearly turned the heart of the great foe himself.
So Celebrimbor wants to do even better. Now Feanor also knew how good he was, and he totally bought into his own hype. He was arrogant, he was jealous, and he turned fanatical. He committed genocide, familicide, mass murder, and performed a whole lot of gaslighting. Feanor was the cause of a lot of the elven infighting throughout the First Age.
Well, what happened to Feanor?
Well, him and some of the elves loyal to him attempted to fight Morgoth, but he was slain by Gothmog, Lord of the Balrogs. Now, Celebrimbor is the grandson of Feanor. He's obviously learned nothing from Feanor's bloody history, as he's about to use Feanor's hammer for a project of his own that will turn out to be almost as bad as the Silmaril Endeavor. The Hammer of Feanor is not a thing in Tolkien, but it does make sense for the show to give us a visual symbol of one generation of elves taking over from another, making very similar mistakes in the process. Now, having some of the Rings of Power crafted by the same hammer that crafted the Silmarils is a new concept, but it's really interesting all the same. Celebrimbor says,
"True creation requires sacrifice."
Celebrimbor is not just making the same mistakes as Feanor, he is making all new ones.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they didn't stop to think if they should.
An artificer himself, Celebrimbor aspires to create something just as incredible as Feanor did. Beyond jewelcraft, he wants to
devise something of real power.
I mean, no way that could go wrong. Doesn't sound arrogant at all.
Rings of power.
Exactly. Elrond doesn't know what he is planning to make. He's here to help him with the how, which means building a forge more powerful than any in existence. The diplomatic Elrond knows right away whose help he will need to make this forge. He'll need dwarves, and so it's time for them to enter the story. The dwarven realm of Khazad-dûm is close to Eregion, and relations between the elves and dwarves are not yet as bleak as they will be in the Third Age. Elrond himself has more respect for them here than he will later on in his life.
The dwarves? They hide in their mountains seeking riches. They care nothing for the troubles of others.
Now, of course, we have seen Khazad-dûm before, but never like this. Another name for this location is Moria. Now, of course, we remember this as part of the perilous journey that the Company of the Ring took through it in the Fellowship of the Ring. This kingdom was founded by Durin and the dwarves in the First Age. It is the first and greatest of all the dwarven kingdoms, though as Saruman says in Fellowship, eventually,
the dwarves delved too greedily and too deep.
Following its downfall, Thror attempted to regain it after the loss of Erebor.
Moria had been taken.
Now, after the death of Smaug and the resettling of Erebor, Balin,
there is one I could call king,
also launched a campaign to retake it. It did not go well.
Here lies Balin, son of Hundin. He is dead then.
Elrond is old friends with Prince Durin, who will eventually become King Durin IV. He is expecting tables full of salted pork.
He'll welcome us with open arms. Tables filled with salted pork.
Salted pork?
Unlike the other dwarven doors that we've seen, this one is not invisible when closed. It must be a sign of friendlier times. If this is the West Gate, aka the Door of Durin, then it will eventually be changed. In Tolkien's lore, it is Celebrimbor who inscribed the door with Elvish writing that is mirrored in starlight.
On starlight and moonlight.
Speak, friend, and enter.
Familiar Elvish runes straight from Tolkien can be clearly seen on these doors, and they are also seen in many places all over the series. Elrond talks his way inside, and we see that Khazad-dûm is thriving, far from the empty shell that we saw in Fellowship.
Behold, the great realm and dwarf city of Dwarendil.
The city is full of life. It has large patches of greenery and waterfalls, and yet the angular dwarven architecture still differentiates the culture from the smooth, rounded lines used by the elves. Beams of light shine all over the place, just like the beam that will eventually shine on Balin's tomb. And just like Gimli said, it's much more than a mine.
And they call it a mine. A mine!
Enter Prince Durin, who Elrond only thought was his friend. He receives a cold reception and has to undergo a trial of endurance. This unlikely relationship between elf and dwarf can't help but make me think about Legolas and Gimli.
I thought I'd die fighting side by side with an elf.
What about side by side with a friend?
Speaking of Gimli, both he and his father Glóin.
What is this horrid creature? A goblin mutant.
That's my wee lad, Gimli.
Are descendants of Prince Durin. Now, before the trial, Durin makes one or two references in the episode to Aule.
Fashioned by Aule himself.
Aule was the Valar who was the master of crafting. Aule was the one who created the sun and the moon from what was left of the two trees, and he also created the dwarves themselves. Now, this is a very rare instance where one of the Valar is named on screen directly.
Once we lift our hammers, we shall break the great stones until one of us can break no more.
If Elrond forfeits this challenge, he will be banished from the Dwarven lands. He takes the gamble, and even though the stakes aren't as high, I was reminded of an entirely different contest between Legolas and Gimli from the movies.
He can't hold his little.
The rivalry here also evokes the ongoing battle tally that Legolas and Gimli have in the Two Towers.
That still only counts as one.
Elrond loses, but he talks Durin into showing him out personally. This is where we find out why Durin has soured on their friendship. For one thing, Elrond is only here because he wants something, not to see his friend.
You missed my wedding. The birth of my children.
This has clearly hurt Durin's feelings deeply, but we don't think that this oversight was because Elrond didn't care. He just simply didn't notice the passage of time. When he's told that it's been 20 years, Elrond replies,
Well, 20 years will do that.
Has it been only 20?
Now, that's a short time for an immortal being, but not for a mortal dwarf.
But I've lived an entire life in that time.
Elrond asked to apologize personally to Durin's family, but we can't tell if he's being sincere or if he's using this as a way to get back into Durin's good graces. I mean, it might be a mixture of both. Then we meet Durin's wife, Disa. It's one of the first major dwarf females that we have met, and she was invented for this show. Disa is beard-free, despite the fact that we've been led to believe that all dwarf women have beards.
It's true you don't see many dwarf women, and in fact, they are so alike in voice and appearance that they're often mistaken for dwarf men. It's the beards.
We do see dwarf women with beards in the prologue of the first Hobbit movie, so maybe it's only some of them. The name Disa is likely a riff on the only dwarf woman that Tolkien ever named, who was named Dis. She was the sister of Thorin Oakenshield and the mother of Fili
and Keely.
Elrond is invited to stay for dinner despite Durin's objections, but if the tables were turned, Durin would likely stay for dinner whether he was invited or not.
Cut!
And like the dwarves we've seen in the movies, Durin enjoys a good belch. Elrond and Durin continue to argue, which is what elves and dwarves do best.
I will be dead before I see the ring in the hands of an elf!
But the fact that Durin has taken expert care of a seedling given to him by Elrond makes it plain that there's still some love here.
Tends it like it's our third child.
The tree that grows despite the darkness is a dwarven hammer smashing of symbolism, as is Elrond's reply.
Where there is love, it is never truly dark. How could it not grow in a home like yours?
Owl's beard, can these two just get along? If close friends can't get over a festering resentment, then what chance does the rest of the greatly divided Middle-earth have? Both Morgoth and Sauron excel at pitting one race against the other by taking advantage of already existing mistrust between cultures, and we're seeing the seeds of that distrust in this scene. But there is hope because Durin comes around and invites Elrond to stay and explains what he wants.
Tell me about your king's proposal so I can decide whether to present it to my father or toss it in the nearest slag pit.
Afterwards, Durin meets with his father, King Durin IV. He's played by Peter Mullen, who has appeared in Westworld, Braveheart, Harry Potter, and more.
Will you fight? No!
Prince Durin tells him,
I'm certain of it. He doesn't know.
But the king isn't satisfied. Now they're hiding something, and the king is paranoid that Elrond might already know what they're hiding.
Tell me, do you not think it's a coincidence that an elf should just land on our doorstep? No.
They look inside a small wooden chest, but we don't get to see what's in there.
Is that what I think it is? Mm-hmm. It's beautiful.
Now, to the Southlands.
Arondir and Bronwyn investigate the burned-down village and discover a large underground chasm. Now, Bronwyn goes on to inform her people, but Arondir investigates, finding a large subterranean system of tunnels. So everything might seem okay on the surface of Middle-earth, kind of, but bad things are happening beneath it. The evil of Sauron waits, burrowing, biding its time. That evil is carving up Middle-earth from the inside, and only a few select people are paying attention. So Bronwyn's son Theo gets a surprise when an orc invades from below, and this isn't the first time that we've seen orcs invade someone's home on screen. The orc slowly rising from below is definitely a sign that evil is physically rising and going on the violent offensive. Aside from the skull mask, the design of this practical orc is not dissimilar to the orc designs that we saw in the Lord of the Rings movies. It does have a little wisp of a creepy beard, which suggests that it's an older strain of orc, one that was possibly not newly bred by Sauron. Theo has another encounter with the creepy sword hilt, and his blood seems to give it energy. Blood magic is rarely a good sign in any fantasy story. The blade starts to remake itself, in a reversal of what the Witch King's Morgul blade does in Fellowship.
Stabbed by a Morgul blade.
We don't really know what the heck is going on with this thing, except that it's
not great, Bob. Now what about Galadriel?
Well, Galadriel is literally lost at sea, stuck between Valinor and Middle-earth. The only thing that she still clings to is her brother's dagger, the symbol of her vow to find and fight Sauron. We're reminded of her brother's words in the premiere.
The stone sees only downward. The darkness of the water is vast and irresistible.
So will Galadriel succumb to the darkness like a stone, or will she look up and find her way like a ship? For now, she looks up to the light of the moon, possibly remembering the light once given off by the tree Teliperion. She's picked up by some humans who are floating on a ruined ship, but they're worried about a worm, which turns out to be a sea serpent. So, though Tolkien is quoted as one saying there are many monsters in the sea, no sea serpents appear in his work. But water drakes, also called water serpents or rain drakes, have appeared in Middle-earth role-playing games for years. Though it wasn't exactly a serpent, we also had the Watcher in the Water in the Fellowship of the Ring. A man named Halbrand survives and takes Galadriel aboard an even smaller raft of wreckage. He has another invention for this series, and he has a curious symbol on the pouch around his neck. He tells Galadriel that his home was destroyed by orcs, and that now it is ashes. Galadriel grieves for what he has lost because she has lost a lot of people in her life as well. But she's still on a mission, and instead of glory, she is doing what she feels like she needs to be called to do. I mean, she has more than a little in common with Nori Brandyfoot.
Hey, where's Halbrand from?
He's from the Southlands, where we met the humans who were lumped in with those corrupted by Morgoth and who fought alongside of him. Those folk didn't trust the elves, so that's why neither Halbrand nor any of the other survivors trust Galadriel. She doesn't really give a damn who they fought for, she just wants him to lead her to where the enemy could be. Even when she's in the middle of the sea, wearing nothing but a wet slip of a dress, Galadriel is still only interested in her mission. But a storm gets in her way because Middle-earth is now throwing everything that it possibly can at her. She gets dragged underwater, and we're reminded once again of her brother's words. Will she sink like a stone, or will she rise and float like the ship? Will she be her own paper boat, or will she be the rocks that were thrown at it? Tolkien was also a devout Catholic, and he said that he considered this epic to be a fundamentally religious and Catholic work. You could read Galadriel's submergence as a kind of baptism, featuring crucifix imagery, after which she is reborn. She is pulled up by Halbrand in a moment that is very similar to this one from the end of Fellowship. So Halbrand stops her descent by cutting the rope with Finrod's knife. Just as symbolically, it's Finrod's words that continue to guide Galadriel toward the light. Galadriel wakes up in the sun, kind of like Tom Hanks in Castaway.
Well done!
And there's a ship beside their little craft. A caped man looms over the side. A lot of the episode's symbols lead to one theme: a gold knife in the depths of the sea, a swarm of fireflies in the dark of night, and a tree flourishing in a dark place because it is filled with love. It makes us think of something that Samwise Gamgee once said.
There's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo. And it's worth fighting for.
Do you stay in the past, or do you press forward? This is the general theme of this episode, and it finds its way into the stories of Galadriel, Halbrand, Alandir, the Harfoots, and Elendil. If pushing forward means leaving your friends behind, do you do it anyways? So it turns out that Arondir was captured by orcs at the end of episode 2. They take him to a covered outpost where all of the vanished men and women from the Southland villages are being kept. The orcs have been using tunnels and coverings to avoid the sun, the light of which is like very dangerous for them. They are creatures of darkness and they cannot abide the light. This is why Sauron will eventually cover the entire land of Mordor in shadow, and why he sends shadows to blunt the light of the sun when sending his orc armies into battle.
The orcs of Mordor have no love of daylight, so he covers the face of the sun to ease their passage along the road to war.
Hey, you know about that? You know in Mordor how it's never sunny? How do the plants grow? Because that's like the food chain and stuff.
Because it's magic.
Okay then.
Arondir is put to work immediately, reunited his friend Thondir and his former watchwarden Revion. Apparently, none of the elves that were charged to watch the Southlands escaped. They're all in chains, and they're all forced to excavate. Tolkien does make reference to these slave-worked fields away south in this wide realm. Sauron plundered those fields to supply his armies, and we can see the beginnings of that right here. Galadriel wakes up on the ship that rescued her and Halbrand in episode 2. It is indeed a ship of Numenor captained by Elendil, a major figure in Tolkien's work.
Victory was near.
Sauron will not have forgotten the sword of Elendil.
He refers to Galadriel as one of the Eldar, a name given to all elves who answered the initial summons to Valinor in their earliest days. Remember, the elves were created in Middle-earth, and then the Valar, that's the gods of this world, called them westward to the land of Valinor. Not every elf accepted, but Galadriel's people did. She is of the Noldor, and all of them answered the call. They sail into Numenor at long last, an island kingdom located between Middle-earth and Valinor. This is the main bastion of the world of men in this era. The Edain were among the men who fought alongside the elves against Morgoth, and their losses were so great in the War of the Wrath that the elves gifted them this land.
They paid for this isle with the blood of their kin.
The island was raised from the sea, and then the Edain were led to it by the Star of Arundel.
I give you the light of Erennian, our most beloved star.
So Numenorians were sometimes called the Dunedain in this period and were blessed with long life. Their descendants were also referred to as Dunedain when they came to Middle-earth, with both Elendil and Isildur being among them. You remember those two guys from the opening of Lord of the Rings.
That Isildur, son of the king, took up his father's sword.
So Aragorn is their direct descendant and is likely the most famous of all the Dunedain.
You cannot be 80.
87.
You are one of the Dunedain.
The descendants of Numenor founded the kingdom of Gondor, so naturally the design of Numenor itself borrows heavily from the architecture and design that we see in the Lord of the Rings movies, Minas Tirith especially. The large statues that dominate the central city evoke Argonath, the great monument of Gondor that we see in Fellowship.
Long have I desired to look upon the kings of old, my kin.
Elendil himself is one of the figures in the movies, alongside his son Isildur. In Tolkien's writing, the Argonath features both Isildur and his brother Anarion. So incidentally, the Valar really only put one rule on the people of Numenor. They told them that they are not allowed to sail westward out of sight of the island. The Valar did not want them to come to the Undying Lands.
Seems reasonable.
Well, you'd think, wouldn't you? Halbrand is amazed by this place, and Galadriel reminds him that these men are not like him. They fought against Morgoth and not with him. Remember, Morgoth was the original evil that existed, and Sauron was his servant. So Halbrand, unlike his ancestors, didn't personally fight alongside Morgoth, but elves have long memories. Galadriel also notices the island has changed much since it was settled, and the sneers that she gets from everyone are part of that change.
Numenor began to turn away our ships.
Elves used to come and go freely from this island and were friends with the Númenóreans, but that is no longer the case. So aside from the architecture, the helmets of the Númenóreans also evoke the helmets of the soldiers of Gondor. The first words we hear from Queen Regent Miriel are,
"No one kneels in Numenor,"
which is a not so subtle clue that these people are done being thankful to the Valar. Resentment is festering.
What have the Romans ever done for us?
Galadriel tells them who she is, and they gasp because she is not just any elf.
Galadriel of the Noldor, daughter of the Golden House of Finarfin, commander of the northern armies of High King Gil-galad.
She references her father Finarfin, who is a half-brother to Feanor. Halbrand introduces himself as just Halbrand.
This is Jon Snow.
All Galadriel wants is passage back to Middle-earth, but no one wants to give her that. Chancellor Pharazôn is introduced in this scene, and he is a major player in Tolkien's writing about Numenor. If you have a weird feeling about this Chancellor, then you should trust it.
The Republic will be reorganized.
Queen Miriel is the daughter of the king, Tar Palantir, in Tolkien's writing, so Halbrand doesn't want to go just yet. We saw him giving an interested eye to the Númenórean forges. So he pipes up, and eventually Pharazôn says that these two will be the guests of Numenor for the time being. Halbrand also showcases a gift for thievery when he swipes Galadriel's knife back from Elendil. Now, though Miriel thinks that Galadriel is but one elf, Pharazôn counsels that an avalanche can start with one stone, which makes us recall the Two Towers and Gandalf's words in Fanghorn Forest.
The coming of Merry and Pippin will be like the falling of small stones that starts an avalanche in the mountains.
He ties this into Miriel's father, and we'll know why shortly. He's also wary of Elendil, noting that Elendil's son Isildur is trying to get into service at sea, just like his father. And that is when we meet the young Isildur doing his best at crewing a ship. Eventually, he'll do this. As well as this.
Destroy it!
No. And he ends up like this. For now, though, he's just a kid trying to learn the ways of the sea, but when looking at Numenor in the distance, a creepy voice calls his name to him. It is similar to how the ring calls to Aragorn in Fellowship. When his captain says,
"There is no harsher master than the sea."
Now, it is mentioning here that a Valar named Ulmo was the master of the seas, and one of the most powerful of his kind. We can't help but think of this mighty being every time the power of the sea is mentioned. One of the most powerful of all the Valar, Ulmo himself did not participate in the eventual fate of Numenor. That task was undertaken by a being who was even more powerful, but no spoilers.
For now.
Right. The repeated refrain of the sea is always right makes sense because they came to their island from the sea, and some of them, Elendil and Isildur included, will eventually return to it. Elendil in particular is a skilled mariner. We also get a good look at Nemoth the Fair, also known as the White Tree of Numenor. It is related to Telperion, one of the two trees of Valinor. Remember, those trees were destroyed by Morgoth, but the Valar Yavanna used a surviving seedling of Telperion to grow Goliatheon, which in turn resulted in Celeborn, the tree, not the elf. The seedlings of Celeborn were brought to Numenor early in its history by the elves, and Nimloth was the result. Unlike Telperion of old, these trees are unable to give off light. Now, if Nemoth looks familiar, it's because Isildur brings a seedling of it with him when Gondor is founded, and that seedling grows into the White Tree of Gondor.
Yes, the White Tree of Gondor.
Now, whether Nimloth is flourishing or not is often a sign of Numenor's health, just as the White Tree is a sign of Gondor's health. It is being tended to in this period of Numenorian history, but how long is that going to last?
Yeah, how long is that gonna last?
Miriel tells us as much.
The faithful believe that when the petals of the white tree fall, 'tis no idle thing.
Her using the phrase "the faithful" is loaded with lore, as divisions within Numenor will eventually separate the people into two groups. There is the faithful on one side, and on the other side, people who are generally awful. Elendil and Isildur are of the faithful. That's why you see them in the Third Age. As for the non-faithful, when she talks about the Valar, she says
that their eyes and their judgment are ever upon us.
She really hits the word judgment, which showcases the resentments against the Valar that are already present. Well, geez, Valar, I know you created the world and you invented this awesome island for us, but what have you done for us lately? Dumb Valar. She grills Elendil on the meaning of his name, and it doesn't just mean one who loves the stars. In the ancient tongue of the Eldar, it can also mean elf friend. Now we know from Tolkien that he lives up to this name, but here Muriel is concerned that he's a friend of the elves who are actually no longer welcome on this island. Ultimately, Elendil is a man of the sea. The sea put Galadriel in his path. I mean, possibly with the help of the Valar Olmo, it kind of depends on your imagination. And for him,
and the sea is always right.
Muriel has him watch over Galadriel, and he's given a sword that has a hollow pommel, just like the Narsil. That's the sword that Elendil famously will wield later on in life. So is this sword supposed to actually be a differently designed Narsil, or is it just another sword? Time will tell. Always does. Back in the miserable Southlands, we get a reminder of how the orcs cannot abide the sunlight. More importantly, Arondir takes notice of this. Revion marks that the orcs have continued to reference Adar, which is an elvish word. They wonder if Morgoth did indeed have a successor. He did. And why the successor would use an elvish name. They note that Sauron once had many names, but Tolkien never wrote that Adar was one of them. Anatar was the most famous, which was the name that he used when he assumed his fair and beautiful form. Remember the key line from the prologue of Lord of the Rings.
But they were all of them deceived.
This series is showing how Sauron deceived all the realms of men, elves, and dwarves. So unlike others in this episode, it's not an everyone escapes or no one escapes situation for Revion. If one of them gets out, then that elf can alert others and bring help. The orcs are upset because the elves have stopped working thanks to the roots of an old tree. And their answer?
Rip the whole stinking tree down!
Saruman will eventually find a similar solution to his problems.
Burn it.
And we saw how that worked out for him.
What you say?
Revion defends the tree, and one of the orcs pretends to offer him and the other elves some water. It turns out to not be poisonous, but the water was never the danger. The danger is from the orc slicing Thondir's throat while they're all drinking up, symbolizing how you can be completely on guard against one danger while leaving yourself open to another one. Thondir's death made us think of Haldir's death in Helm's Deep. To prevent more elven deaths, Arondir cuts down the tree. It's for the greater good.
How can this be for the greater good? The greater good. Shut it!
Elendil reveals to Galadriel that he speaks Elvish and that there are still signs of the old friendship in many places throughout the city. He grew up in the west, close to the Hall of Laws, and the most faithful people to the elves still reside there. In Tolkien's writing about Numenor, the western area was called Eldalande, which translates to mean Haven of the Eldar. Galadriel and Elendil ride to the west, and Galadriel seems completely free of all the burdens while she's on horseback. Her white horse evokes Shadowfax, as well as Asfaloth, written by Glorfindel in the books and by Arwen in Fellowship. Back to Halbrand's storyline, he's trying to get with the blacksmiths that he gave the hungry eye to upon his arrival. He isn't allowed to join them until he gets a special crest, so he gets them all drunk and swipes one, proving adept at thievery once again. He gets caught and attacked, first asking the smiths,
"Please, don't do this."
Why? Well, because he proceeds to kick the stuffing out of all of them with like minimal effort, and as he's told everyone, he's trying to turn over a new leaf. Galadriel discovers the Hall of Laws was assembled by Elros, who was the first of the Númenórean kings. Elros was the brother of Elrond, and their parents were Arundel and Elwig. Both Elros and Elrond were considered half-elven due to their heritage, and following the War of the Wrath, both of them were given a choice: live as mortal men or live among the elves. Elrond, as we know, chose the elven way of life, but Elros made the opposite choice, becoming one of the Edain and following the Star of Arundel to Númenor. The line of the Númenórean kings is also called the line of Elros. So Galadriel actually knew Elros, but she tells Elendil that she was always closer with his brother, Elrond. We've already seen that friendship in this series. Elendil lets it slip that the king who ruled before Muriel was loyal to the elves and was deposed because of it. He keeps himself in a tower, and once again, we're fairly sure that he's talking about Tar Palantir, the father of Queen Regent Muriel. The secret of the sigil that Galadriel's been following is then revealed, and it's awesome. While it may also represent the Eye of Sauron, it is no sigil. It is a map, specifically one of the Southlands. When put to a map of Middle-earth and turned to the side, the map symbol looks exactly like Mordor. A plan written in black speech has also been found, one that intends for evil to endure and thrive. It is
to be enacted in the event of Morgoth's defeat by his successor.
Galadriel's worst fears are confirmed. Sauron is still at work, going along with a contingency plan that has been in place for a very long time. The Southland storyline and its relation to Mordor suddenly snaps into focus. After this grim realization, the series does an about-face and brings us back to the Harfoots, who are enjoying a festival prior to their upcoming migration. Sadok Burrows and the others have a chant.
Nobody goes up tree.
And nobody walks alone.
But they don't really mean that as literally as we may think. Largo Brandyfoot is still recovering from his injury in episode 2. As some have pointed out, he broke his ankle at the same time the stranger broke a stick. Largo tells Marigold that they will not be left behind because of his injury. They will all make it to their next destination. Unlike the captive elves in the south, the Brandyfoots are going all or nothing. Nori is still trying to decipher the stars shown to her by the stranger, but Poppy Proudfellow is against it. She's gone full Bilbo Baggins at the start of The Hobbit, giving Gandalf a good morning and not wanting anything to do with anything.
Good morning.
Her line,
"There's common sense and nonsense,"
also reminds us of a pre-adventure Bilbo. Nori steals a star chart from Sadok while he's busy rewriting a verse, making us think of how Bilbo rewrote one of his own poems in Rivendell in the Book of the Fellowship.
There and back again. A Hobbit's Tale by Bilbo Baggins.
Sadok begins a gathering.
Most agreeable, honorable Harfoots.
Which reminded us of Bilbo's speech at his 11th birthday party.
My dear Bagginses and Buffins.
And then he reads a list of Harfoots who fell behind on previous migrations. They either died or couldn't continue on anymore. Those that are left behind are, as Sadok says, carried on in their hearts and memories. So, like, no one walks alone is more of a spiritual ideal for them. Why is Poppy so reluctant to stick his neck out to help someone else? Well, the entire Proudfellow family are either dead or have been left behind.
What was your name again, dear?
Thorndyke.
Thank you.
We wait for you, they say. For a nomadic people to survive, they're bound to have to make difficult choices. His own wife, Daffodil, was taken by wolves, and surely he'd rather have that not happen to him.
We wait for you.
And I wait for you. The stranger tries to make sense of the star map that Nori stole, and he ends up lighting it on fire. He bungles the attempt to put it out so badly that he ends up revealing himself to the entire camp. So then Nori's secret's out and no one is happy, but she was not content to just leave the stranger there. She didn't want to leave him behind when she doesn't have to. She's going to do the right thing and not the traditional thing. When she's told that they don't need friends, they only need to survive, she responds with a heck of a line that basically sums up Lord of the Rings.
Without friends, what are we surviving for?
Now we are reminded of the Fellowship, of Thorin's company, and of the multitudes of friendships that have saved Middle-earth time and time again. Although Nori has broken Harfoot laws and should be de-caravanned, Sadok lets her and her family stay on, albeit at the back of the caravan. Nori knows she isn't special and she's just a little person after all.
But you're only quite a little fellow. In a wide world, after all.
But she believes that the stranger is important. He may have caused Largo's accident and the death of the Firefly, but it doesn't seem like he did either out of malevolence. If anything, they were both done out of ignorance. He's not used to the magic surging within him, and he doesn't yet know how to use it. At a family dinner with Elendil, Isildur, and Eärien, Isildur brings up his brother Anarion, who we have yet to meet on this series. Now, as we previously mentioned, the Argonauts feature sculptures of both him and Isildur in Tolkien's writing. Peter Jackson's movies did not give Anarion that much attention. Elendil makes us think that Anarion has ventured out to the western shores, where we know that people are still sympathetic to the elves. And this is where Isildur's interests lie, even though Elendil maintains that the past is dead. Isildur, knowing exactly who Galadriel is and having an interest in elvish works, makes it clear that the past is not dead for him, and he may have interest in more magical and more powerful things. And this line from Elendil,
"We either move forward or we die with it,"
really makes him sound like a Harfoot.
They likewise will be carried with us in our hearts and in our memories.
Halbrand was locked up after his spree of violence, so Galadriel goes to visit him.
Who is he?
Well, Galadriel is wondering the same thing. She found a scroll in the west that has the same sigil on it that we saw in Halbrand's little pouch. She says that a man bearing that mark once united the Southlands. She knows Halbrand is from the Southlands and remembers that he said that they have no king, so she puts it all together.
Your people have no king, for you are him.
Halbrand all but confirms it, telling Galadriel that the historical king she spoke of swore allegiance to Morgoth. She refutes that it was mere destiny that brought them together. Galadriel believes in much higher powers. She wants this king in rags to return to Middle-earth with her so both of them can redeem their bloodlines. She says that her lineage began the war. Morgoth obviously was the chief adversary, but the Noldor, and especially her uncle Feanor, certainly made things worse. So once again, we have a secret king situation similar to Aragorn in some ways.
This is no mere ranger. He is Aragorn, son of Arathorn.
Like Halbrand, Aragorn was wary of his connection to weaknesses that came before him.
The same blood flows in my veins. Same weakness.
Halbrand is no king of Gondor because Gondor doesn't even exist yet. In a tower that looks very similar to the citadel of Minas Tirith, Miriel tells her father, who, I'll say, would be Tar Palantir according to Tolkien's lore. We think that he's the same character here because Miriel tells him that it is happening.
But we feared. The elf has arrived.
The fall of Numenor has been seen by her father, and Galadriel could be the first stone that will cause the avalanche. Now the name, Tar Palantir, might sound familiar, and that's because it is similar to the name given to the Seeing Stones, the Palantir. They were called Seeing Stones, and they were cause for trouble in Lord of the Rings.
The lost Seeing Stones. We do not know who else may be watching.
Feanor created an unknown number of them, and some of them wound up in Numenor, and Elendil brought 7 of them to Middle-earth. Now, while they weren't used for seeing the future, they could be used to watch and communicate over vast distances, and they will be making an appearance very soon on this series. Back in the Southland /Mordor / the place where bad stuff is going on, Arondir and his fellow captives launch an escape attempt. They try to use the orcs' aversion to the sun against them, and like Legolas, they make fancy use of their chains. We get our first real look at a warg in this series, and we think that the Watch Warden is going to escape. Instead, he ends up getting riddled with arrows like Boromir. Arondir is finally taken to Adar as the orcs chant the name of their leader. We see someone who looks like an elf before the episode cuts to credits. So now it's time to remember the first words spoken at the premiere of this series. As Galadriel said,
"Nothing is evil in the beginning."
The line comes directly from Tolkien, spoken by Elrond in the book of the Fellowship of the Ring. His version of it is, "For nothing is evil in the beginning. Even Sauron was not so." So this theme comes into even sharper focus in episode 4, from the main title sequence onward. And speaking of that main title sequence, I think it's time that we break it down, because some of you have already pointed out that this main title sequence that shows sand turning into shapes with the power of music evokes the Song of Ainur, which happens at the very beginning of the Silmarillion. Before time began, Aya was sung into existence. Aya means the world in Tolkien speech. At the dawn of creation, the creator created the Ainur, and the greatest of them was Melkor, who is the big bad of this entire series. But even Melkor was not evil at the dawn of creation. Now this being who would go on to become the Dark Lord Morgoth became impatient and desired more power. He lost the faith and became resentful that there were secrets that he was not yet privy to. He wanted to create greatness of his own, and his selfish thoughts brought discord to this great music when it was sung. We see this happening in the opening sequence when the dark slithering corruption comes sliding in. The creators of this series have confirmed that this is what they wanted the opening credits to evoke, the music of Ainur, and it's only proper that the main title theme is written by Howard Shore, the Academy Award-winning composer for all 6 of Peter Jackson's movie adaptations of Tolkien, and the great Bear McCreary takes the baton from him and writes all the gorgeous music that we hear in the series itself. Now, if Melkor had never grown resentful, then everything would have been just fine, there would have been no conflict, and Tolkien's lore would have comprised of one very brief, boring chapter. This is fantasy, but the defects of real human beings find their way in, cause conflict, and make the story applicable. Tolkien himself preferred that people refer to his work as being applicable and not allegorical. Resentment, secrets, and the desire to attain more power, and the feeling that you were entitled to that power, is a theme that runs through every storyline in this episode. Even when the power being sought is going to be used to avert disaster, it becomes something of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Sauron is a great threat, but he's not the only source of corruption there is. Like Melkor showed us at the beginning of time, conflict can arise from within, with no help from anyone. The episode's title is The Great Wave, and it is the price of arrogance. Past a certain point, this wave cannot be avoided. We're reminded once again of Gondor as we join Queen Miriel, as the main audience chamber of the Numenor looks exactly like the upper level and battlement of Minas Tirith, as depicted in Return of the King. Miriel dreams of a great wave sweeping over the entirety of Numenor and then laying it to waste. The Numenorians believe the sea is always right, so she knows that something somewhere is off, and this disaster has to be averted.
Will it be averted?
Well, did did you see Numenor in the movies? Look, Doug, anything can happen. Muriel's vision of the Great Wave is something that was all too real for Tolkien himself. In his letters, he writes often that the image of an ineluctable wave coming up out of the sea and to engulf the land was a recurring nightmare of his. He freed himself of this nightmare by writing it into the history of Numenor, and he also gave a similar dream to Faramir in The Lord of the Rings. Now that's in the Third Age though, and Faramir obviously had Third Age troubles on his mind. But in the movie Return of the King, the dream was transferred from Faramir to Éowyn.
I dreamed I saw a great wave.
And since Faramir and Éowyn are soulmates who end up married, it's fair that Jackson and company had her talk about the dream and not him. When the guildsmen of Numenor talk about Galadriel whispering poison into the queen's ear, we can't help but think of Sauron and how he will eventually do the same thing to many characters. Galadriel is trying to help these people, but the Numenorians are long past giving respect to the elves or the Valar, who gave them this island in the first place. Chancellor Pharazôn, who probably goes to bed looking at himself in the mirror, talks to his son about stagecraft, and he makes it clear that his ambitions are not small. Pharazôn's son is an invention for this show and wouldn't look out of place in I, Claudius. The guildsmen are worried about elves infiltrating their workforce.
Workers who don't sleep, don't tire, don't age.
But they sound more like this.
They did your job. They did your job. They did your job.
They've gotten by just fine without the help of the elves for some time, and they don't want to be accountable to anyone or have someone judge them in any way. They have forgotten their history, including how they ended up on this island in the first place. They accuse the queen of being blind and possibly an elf lover. Now, we've already seen in the opening that the queen sees things much clearer than anyone else on this island. And as for being an elf lover,
What have the Romans ever done for us?
Pharazôn joins them and reminds them all that they are of the Edain and the house of Elros, as well as Armenellos, which is the great structure of the rulers. The Valar raised the island, but these men built everything on it with no help from anyone, and as he says, it is the triumph of our civilization. Pharazôn starts by criticizing this rabble, but he soon stokes their righteous anger even hotter than it was before. Their ambition was small, and his is great. We see just how easily Pharazôn is able to play on their pride and manipulate the people of Numenor, and Sauron is nowhere in sight.
For by the calluses on my hands, I swear that elven hands will never take Numenor's helm.
And to put everything well and truly over the top, he gets everyone drunk.
Drinks all round!
That should help. The guy tells it just like it is and talks about jobs. What could go wrong? His son flirts with Elendil's daughter, who you'll recall is another invention of the show. Perhaps they'll both sail away to the non-Tolkien character convention that the History of Harfoot storyline is enjoying this week. Anything can happen with these two because they are not beholden to any canon or lore. He offers her wine from the vineyards near the Meneltarma, with the Meneltarma being the central peak of this entire island. It is sometimes referred to in Tolkien as the Pillar of Heaven. When Galadriel presents Muriel with a filthy parchment that bears the marking of the evil contingency plan, we're reminded of Gandalf showing Thorin a similar looking scrap in the opening flashback of the second Hobbit movie.
Promise of payment.
When she tells Muriel that she suspects Halbrand is a king of the Southlands, Muriel cracks a joke about Elendil being an emperor. Not a great joke, but Muriel will be performing her Type 5 at the Comedy Store next week. So what's the deal with elves, am I right? Elendil won't ever be an emperor, but he will eventually be the High King of the Dunedain. So take that, Queen Chuckles. Muriel doesn't like hearing that the task of defeating Sauron isn't finished. They were once in the fight right alongside the elves, and they got a nice island out of it. So now they have to go back and fight again? Muriel calls Galadriel's call for men and elves to unite again ambitious, which is rich when you consider what the very ambitious Pharazôn is currently doing. Galadriel does not back down, as we've now come to expect from this show's version of the character. When she says,
"There's a tempest in me,"
we know that she is not just being metaphorical.
Treacherous is the sea, stronger than the foundations of the earth!
Muriel does not like her talking about her father, Tal Palantir, so Galadriel gets thrown in prison. King Thranduil will eventually deal with smaller problems in a similar fashion.
Stay here, if you will, and rot.
Isildur, meanwhile, still hears his name being called from the western part of Numenor, which we visited in episode 3. It is called Eldalande in Tolkien, which translates to Elf Haven. Tolkien wrote that this port was the most beautiful haven on Numenor, so whatever is calling to Isildur may be coming from there. The mysterious voice coming out of the bright sunlight is more interesting to Isildur than the menial task of manning his rope, so he just lets the rope go. Once again, his interest in things beyond his reckoning is guiding him more than duty.
Destroy it!
His actions get both him and his friends kicked off the ship, even though he was only looking to be kicked off himself. He doesn't realize that his actions affect other people, but here's the scene when he eventually learns that lesson. One of his friends calls him out on all this.
Leave it to you to get kicked out of something you never earned in the first place.
And we think of Aragorn an age later and how he wants nothing to do with the status and title that he was born with.
I do not want that power. I have never wanted it.
When his friend says,
the real problem is him. And that's not going anywhere.
He has no idea how prophetic he is being. Now we get our first look at Adar, and he is indeed a corrupted elf. Now nothing is evil in the beginning, but something has turned this particular elf to nefarious ends. Because he is an invention of the show, we don't know what happened to him. We only know that his visible scars dominate part of his face, and it reminds us a little of Thranduil talking about dragonfire.
I have faced the great serpents of the north.
When he gives one of the orcs a mercy killing, we see real emotion in Adar's eyes. You'll remember that Adar translates to father from Elvish, and all of these orcs may be calling him father because he is breeding these orcs himself. The look on his face shows that he might even care for them, unlike other characters who breed orcs.
Do you know how the orcs first came into being? They were elves once.
The other orcs treat this fallen orc with a lot more respect than the orcs of the Third Age do.
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys!
Arondir tells Adar that he was born in Beleriand, which is a huge region in the northwestern Middle-earth during the First Age. It was completely destroyed in the War of the Wrath and wiped off the map, and the only part of it that survived is Lindon, seen on this series as the realm of High King Gil-galad. Now because Beleriand no longer exists in the Second Age, we can assume that Arondir was present in the First Age. We can also assume the same of Adar, as he talks about walking in Beleriand himself, referring to the mouth of the river, which is likely a reference to the mouths of the river Sirion. He says that Arondir has been told lies that run deep, like the corruption that we see constantly spreading under the surface of Middle-earth. In terms of Tolkien lore, Adar might not be a god, but Sauron is, or at least a demigod called a Maiar. And Adar does follow all of this up with a not yet. So he may be looking at something more powerful with envy, like Melkor once looked at Eru, and how the Númenóreans now look at the elves. Now Bronwyn has taken all of the Southlanders to safety in the former Elvish Watchtower, and we're reminded of the people in Rohan seeking safety in Helm's Deep. Bronwyn also takes charge, much in the same way that Éowyn does before Theoden arrives.
Where's the rest?
This is all we could say, my lady.
Her son Theo still has a haircut that hides his ears, so that's interesting, isn't it?
The ears make all the difference.
Bronwyn and Onadir are trading looks, but they may have already traded much more than that. When he goes scavenging for supplies, we see the sun suddenly get clouded over. Already, we are on high alert. Without the protection of the sunlight, the orcs will be on their way, and that's exactly what happens, and Theo is attacked by an orc who shares the tradition of licking blood off of knives. When Theo uses his blood-powered sword hilt to defend himself, the orc recognizes it and asks, "Where'd you get that?" Now Theo escapes the orc after igniting the hilt, and when they go shouting to the others, he says, "I found it, which makes us think that this isn't just any other blood-powered sword hilt, it's an important blood-powered sword hilt.
So what do you think it is?
I think it's an Necrosword from Thor: Love and Thunder.
Really?
No. Celebrimbor's Forge is coming along just fine thanks to Elrond's new arrangement with Prince Durin. You know, when it comes to trying to make things better, but only ended up making things worse, there are fewer examples that are more glaring than Celebrimbor. Now, Celebrimbor name drops Elrond's father, who we have talked about in previous videos. He was Arundel the Mariner and one of the most famous elves of all time. When Celebrimbor talks about him, there might be a hint of yearning for the greatness that was once bestowed upon Arundel. Celebrimbor's pursuit of his own greatness is leading him to forge the Rings of Power. Again, we're seeing somebody's ego create an opening for evil to exploit. Now, continuing with the episode's theme of alliance members, or former alliance members, not trusting each other, Celebrimbor thinks that Prince Durin has a secret, and he's not wrong. We saw that secret chest in episode 2. Elrond tries to use his political moverings on Disa to get answers, but she proves that she is not one to be trifled with.
It's a recipe for strong gravy.
Of all the characters that this series has newly invented, Disa is definitely one of our favorites. She's not blindly covering for her husband either. We see her discussing her false story with Durin in the very next scene. She's fully in on this, and she's smart enough to look around and tell Durin to keep his voice down. Now, they were right to not underestimate Elrond, and he isn't close enough to overhear them. He does see them from far off, though, reminding us of how keen the eyes of elves are. Presumably, he has read their lips because he grasped the secret that they're withholding in the Old Mine. Specifically, it's the Old Mine beneath the Mirror. Now, though not featured in Jackson's adaptation of The Fellowship of the Ring, the Mirror is written about by Tolkien in the Fellowship book in the chapters having to do with the company's trek through Moria. This was a vast lake outside of Khazad-dûm. Now, the original Durin the Deathless, looked into its waters and saw an image of himself wearing a crown. Because of this vision, he decided to build Khazad-dûm in that location, within the mountain that fed Mirror Mirror itself. Called Khaled Zerim in Dwarvish, it is called Nen Kenendril in Sindarin, which translates to Lake Looking Glass.
So why should I care about any of that?
Well, Doug, prophetic visions and dreams have already played a huge part in this episode, and will continue to do so. The mention of the Mirror is a fascinating addition, assuming that you know what the Mirror is. Elrond gets in through one of the secret dwarf doors that look invisible when closed.
Rich crone, kiss the stone, polish your gems and go.
And Durin is not happy to see him. In an episode full of rivalries and old alliances breaking down, the last thing we need is for dwarves and elves to start going at it. There's nothing that Elrond doesn't know that he hasn't told Durin. He doesn't know what Celebrimbor is going to do with the forge that they're making, so there's no secret for him to tell at that moment. Durin's threat that Elrond's kin will be doomed if he tells anyone the secret once again relates to the anger among the races on this show, sometimes with resentments that go very far back. So, what's in the box? A new ore that was discovered by Disa, which might be dearer than gold.
Better than silk. Harder than iron as weaponry, it would best our proudest blades.
Fans of both the books and the movies will know exactly what ore this is.
The wealth of Moria was not in gold or jewels, but mithril.
When Durin says that it could bring about a whole new age for his people, he's not wrong. Elrond sees no problem sharing the secret far and wide, but Durin knows better.
It's perilous to mine. My father has restricted our every efforts.
Durin's father, Durin III, is right to restrict those efforts because, eventually,
the dwarves delved too greedily and too deep.
Now, in Tolkien's writing, mithril could be found in Moria, but also in Numenor. Everyone and anyone wanted it, and it was the most precious metal in the entire lore. Bilbo Baggins received a shirt of mithril from Thorin.
This vest is made of silver steel. Mithril.
And Bilbo then passed it on to Frodo.
As light as a feather, and as hard dragon scales. Let me see you put it on.
Gandalf lets everyone know exactly what a grand gift that was.
I never told him, but its worth was greater than the value of a shire.
In Tolkien, the dwarvish name for it was a secret. Now, on the series, Durin tells Elrond what they call it, as well as what the Elvish translation might be.
In our tongue, grey glitter. In yours, something like Mithraud.
No, it would be Mithril.
Now, when the mind shakes and part of it caves in, it's a harbinger of the mithril-related dangers to come.
What's happening with my man Halbrand?
Wow, he uses one too many horse metaphors when he's talking to Galadriel. But he's not wrong when he tells her that there is a more diplomatic way to go about getting what she wants, especially in the world of men. Though he's the bluntest instrument around, Halbrand knows that a needle can be more effective than a hammer, even for the commander of the Northern Elvish armies. The following exchange speaks volumes.
It seems to me that you do well to identify what it is that your opponent most fears. Give them a means of mastering it.
Not only is that exactly what Pharazôn is doing, it is exactly what Sauron will eventually do with the Rings of Power. He will deceive all of his enemies with the rings, a means to master their fears, and then he will secretly create the One Ring, which will master all of the other rings and the ones who wield them. Galadriel might need to learn diplomacy, but she does not need to learn how to take out a bunch of guards. So for all his talk, Pharazôn looks at her in fear and lets her walk out, hardly even drawing his sword. Halbrand almost certainly tells Pharazôn where Galadriel is going as a means to advance whatever his own agenda is. When Isildur talks to his sister about no longer being worthy of going into the West, he's talking about going into the Western Elvish region of Numenor. But his words can't help but take on a grander meaning. Going into the West, in the larger sense, means going to Valinor, something that the Numenorians are forbidden to do. At this point on the show, going to Valinor is a gift that not every elf receives, which makes Galadriel's rejection of the gift all the more impactful. The theme of far-seeing visions and dreams now hits a new high as Galadriel finds Miriel standing by the king in the tower. As we said in our previous video, this is Miriel's father, Tar Palantir. He was a truth seer who had visions that foretold Numenor's doom. The white tree dropping petals was in these visions, as was the Great Wave. On this show, his visions, and the inability to stop the oncoming doom, has made him bedridden and possibly insane. Miriel doesn't want the truth of the king's condition to get out, so just like Elrond and Durin, Galadriel and Miriel have a secret. If the people knew of the king's condition and what his visions entailed, then faith in both him and Miriel would fade, and control of the people would be lost. Panic would ensue. Hiding him in a tower is the only way to deal with this. As he is in Tolkien's writing, Tar Palantir is loyal to the elves. Now on the show, Miriel tells Galadriel that the king wanted to return to these ways, as well as the forgiveness of the Valar, whose judgment he felt was on them. And he's right about that. Miriel only took up the crown because the Numenorians rebelled against what Tar Palantir wanted, but there was yet another royal secret in the mix.
Palantir.
One of the Seeing Stones we talked about in our previous video, the Palantir, were forged by Feanir in the First Age. After the Númenóreans broke off contact with the Eldar, Tolkien wrote that a Palantir was given to the faithful of Númenor so they could still communicate with them. Elendil eventually brings 7 of these Seeing Stones to Middle-earth. In the series, Muriel says that there are only 7 stones in total, and that this is the only one they know the location of. So the show is playing out Tar Palantir's visions and the Palantir Seeing Stones a little differently, as here, the stone was passed on to him along with a secret.
Another secret. Secrets.
When Galadriel says that she has touched a Palantir before, it makes sense, because Feanor created them and she was his niece. Touching it here, Galadriel gets a full vision of the falling petals and the wave. As Muriel says,
"It is Númenor's future you saw."
Using a Palantir to show a vision of the future is a bit of a stretch. If anything, this scene has more in common with Galadriel's mirror and Fellowship.
Palantiri show many visions. Some that will never come to pass.
The mirror shows many things. Things that were, things that are, and some things that have not yet come to pass.
Muriel is so concerned with the arrival of Galadriel because the vision begins with a visiting elf. Her following line,
"Only Númenor can bring about her downfall,"
shows that Muriel isn't just another elf hater either. Now, while many Númenóreans are resentful of the elves and the Valar, and they're in the midst of fully turning away from them, Muriel knows that the island was given to them by the Valar, and if the Númenóreans succumb to darkness, then the Valar can take it back. Once again, Númenor doesn't need Sauron to doom itself. He may come along and speed up the process, but Pharazôn's gonna Pharazôn. Muriel is damned no matter what she does, so she opts for a quick fix. Get rid of the only harbinger around and hope that nothing else in the vision comes true. Galadriel knows full well that sending her away and choosing to not aid in her fight is a choice based in fear, but she also emphasizes that she is no stranger to being the only one who sees the danger when everyone else is painting mission accomplished banners.
I know what it is to be the only one. The only one who sees.
Do not choose fear, choose faith. Join with Galadriel and let the alliance with the elves be reborn. Let this be the hour that you draw swords together. Ride out and meet them.
Ride out with me.
Nope. Muriel chooses fear.
I choose the danger.
Now Theo has gotten out of the well he was hiding in, possibly with a pouch similar to Halbrand's around his neck, and after a long and wonderful tracking shot of him escaping the village, he's finally on his way back to the tower with the help of Arondir, and their running from the orcs to the woods definitely reminded us of this.
It's working! I know it's working! Run!
Arondir also has a nice chance to show off some of his Legolas moves, including this all-timer right here. When Arondir, Theo, and Bronwyn hit a spot where the sun comes out, we're relieved. These orcs aren't going to go anywhere near them now. So here's hoping that no one ever finds a way to breed an orc that can move freely through the sunlight.
He's breeding an army in the caverns of Isengard. An army that can move in sunlight.
When Elrond watches Desus sing to the stone, we get an insight into how deep the dwarves' relationship with stone truly is. They don't just hammer and chisel their way through it, they sing to it, ask for guidance, and ask it to reveal its secrets to them. It is a relationship that no other race in Middle-earth has, making the dwarves truly remarkable. Music playing a part in the creation also calls back to the Song of Ainur, which we spoke of at the start of this video. Durin may have gotten everyone out of the collapse alive, but when he returns, he says that his father has shut down the entire vein. He's being cautious, but Durin wishes otherwise.
Even the hottest coals eventually cool.
Well, sometimes I wish they wouldn't.
The wealth and prosperity that Mithril could bring to his people is already beginning to take precedence over the safety of Durin's people. He's a little too ready to take chances. We hear more of the tale of Elrond's father, Arendil the Mariner, whose deeds were so great that the Elder turned him into a star.
I give you the light of Erenniel, our most beloved star.
Elrond had a new star in the sky, but he couldn't help but wonder what his father would think if he was still there with him. He'd only want one more conversation with him, something that Muriel probably would wish for as well, and something that Isildur is not taking advantage of. Durin's father has not been turned into a star, so Elrond's encouraging him to not waste time that they have together is a touching moment between them. Durin takes the advice and talks with his dad, King Durin III, who talks to him about how dwarves believe that when a new king is crowned,
the voices of all his forebears flow into him.
Not only does this echo the passing on of Tar Palantir's vision, it also tracks with Tolkien's writing about the line of Durin. The dwarves believed that Durin I would return 7 times, and that certain members of his line would be Durin reborn. As the king says,
"Forever am I with you, my son, even in anger,
Sometimes in anger most of all.
So though father and son are at peace for the moment, they both believe that there is something more at work when it comes to the elves. They aren't wrong. So now that we know the true connection between the Southlands and Mordor, the elvish watchtower is starting to look like it could eventually become the Tower of Cirith Ungol. Nothing is evil in the beginning. The loyalties of the people in the Southlands are about to be tested as well, because Adar has sent Arondir back with a message.
That your people may live, if you forsake all claim to these lands, and swear fealty to him.
When the tavern keeper reveals to Theo that he knows all about the sword hilt that he took from the cellar, he also reveals that he bears the Sauron contingency mark on his arm, just as Theo now does. He also knows about a beautiful servant that we feel he's ready to serve again. So Pharazôn may get what he wants when Galadriel gets back on another boat to skip town, but the episode has one final portent to show us. Miriel began the episode dreaming of Numenor's potential fall, but now she sees part of the vision for real. The petals of Nimloth begin to fall. She only has to give one look to the ever-faithful Elendil and they know exactly what they have to do. She must give a speech worthy of Aragorn, but Numenor, as one, must once again believe what their ancestors believed. Potential heroes and hindrances about. Isildur could be helpful, but when we see Halbrand, well, he's just a big question mark. Miriel's going to do something that is truly worthy of the Edain of old. She is going to personally bring Galadriel back to Middle-earth. Galadriel, never averse to getting off of a boat, has returned and stands alongside her. They will go to the Southlands in force to counter the rising threat, and when it really counts, Isildur steps up. A vast number of Numenorians are willing to be of service as well. It would seem that faith is not as tiny a thread to hang a kingdom on as Miriel once thought. It can inspire and it can unite. The episode begins with Numenor being distinctly anti-elf and wanting to isolate from the rest of the world. Cut to the end and they're all volunteering to go to war. Perhaps resentment, pride, and jealousy have yet to take too strong of a hold. So will this be enough to literally turn the tide to potentially save Numenor?
Well, they got a shot.
Got a shot.
Got a shot.
The episode is titled Partings, which may be a nod to the chapter in the Book of Return of the King called Many Partings. While it is a literal reference in this episode to certain characters and groups of characters parting ways, it is also evocative of how many of them seek to part with their past misdeeds. When Nori teaches the stranger some words, she begins with migration.
Means like to move. What we do, Harfoot.
Gandalf was known as the Wandering Wizard, and of the 5 Istari was the only one that we get to know who never planted roots anywhere. Saruman settled at Isengard, and Radagast stayed close to Roscovel. Tolkien wrote that the Blue Wizards went into the east with Saruman and were never heard from again, so who knows what happened to them. Gandalf learning about wandering and migration this early on makes sense, because that becomes his way of life. It isn't an easy life, as we know that Gandalf is no stranger to trouble. Nori introduces that concept to him in this scene as well.
Perils?
Like a danger.
The stranger doesn't seem to know what death is, which would track with him potentially being a Maiar, and he has no idea that he caused the death of the Firefly. The way he reacts to this makes it clear that it was an accident. He is not in full control of his powers. To make something dead, as Nori puts it, is the opposite of life. That's the ultimate parting in many ways. There's also the parting ways of good and evil, and many characters in this episode who think that they are good prove to be anything but.
When all this is ended, elves will take orders from us.
Characters that are scared of what they could become are a different story.
When these people discover it, they will cuss me out.
The stranger is worried that he himself is peril.
I'm peril.
But Nori is certain that he's anything but.
You're not a peril. You're good.
I'm good.
The stranger struggles to understand the concept, showing that for now, at least he has a simpler mind than many others on this show.
I'm good.
I'm good too.
Yes, you are. To smash the Gandalf hammer even more, the shot of Nori and the stranger looks just like this shot of Gandalf and Bilbo from the 3rd Hobbit movie. We haven't mentioned this theory yet, but it's going around, so we'll do it now. It's not ours, but it's great all the same. We'd bet all of the money in your wallets that the wheels on the Harfoot carts will eventually become the doors of hobbit holes. They are wandering now, but they will eventually settle. Their wheels keep them in motion, constantly moving from peril. Eventually, they will become doors to keep the peril out. And yes, that peril includes the Sackville Bagginses. Poppy got the song that she sings from her mother, who was left behind. Her singing it as the group travels ever on evokes many of Tolkien's own traveling songs. The theme of wandering once again comes up often in the lines of the song, which is probably the most beautiful moment that the show has given us thus far. The final line of the song also happens to be right from Tolkien. In the book The Fellowship of the Ring, Gandalf includes a few lines of a poem in a letter to Frodo, intending the lines to get Frodo to trust Strider. The poem is a reworking of an older work of Tolkien's, which he updates to start, "All that is gold does not glitter, not all those who wander are lost." It is revealed later that these lines were written about Aragorn by Bilbo Baggins, so, theoretically, Bilbo could have taken that line from this older Harfoot song. Gandalf's use of it could also now have a deeper meaning. The last lines of the poem are spoken by Arwen in the movie Return of the King.
Renewed shall be blade that was broken, the crownless again shall be king.
Though the elvish watchtower that they are using as a fortress was once a symbol of shame to the men who stood with Morgoth, Bronwyn seeks to part with that history and transform the tower into something more.
This tower will no longer be a reminder of our frailty, but a symbol of our strength.
It seems like the Southlanders are going to unite and fight as hands go up in support, mirroring the Númenóreans in Episode 4. It doesn't go the same way, however, as Waldreg steps up and gives a voice of dissent. The elves were right to watch these people because not all of them have learned from the past, even after all of this time. Half of them follow Waldreg to pledge fealty to Adar, ready to make the same mistakes again.
I am ready to get hurt again.
Númenóreans may have looked united, but they have resentments and schemes among them all that seek to tear them apart. Isildur, always ambitious, has forsaken going into the west of Númenor and wants in on this mission.
Slip me to the front of the line.
As usual, Isildur wants power that he has not yet earned. Many of the wealthy-looking Númenóreans show that they don't support joining the fight, and they prove as much when they yell questions to Pharazôn. They likely cannot see any upside in this for them, so why would they go? Elendil's daughter Eärien doesn't support it either, but this may be because she doesn't want to lose another parent. Pharazôn's son, Caiman, agrees with her. Halbrand at his forge definitely makes us think of Narsil being reforged in the Return of the King movie. He's able to show Miriel and Pharazôn that the enemy is likely headed for the Elvish Watchtower, which could point to the Númenóreans giving the Southlanders a last-minute save in their upcoming battle. The fact that Halbrand is going back to Middle-earth with the Númenórean forces is definitely news to him.
I'm certain your fellowship will prove just as invaluable once you make landfall.
Landfall.
Where Elrond gently nudged Aragorn to take up his true destiny in the movie of Fellowship of the Ring,
You are the last of that bloodline. There is no other.
Galadriel is just making the choice for Halbrand without asking him.
I have no doubt, come time, he will do his part.
He doesn't appreciate it and once again uses his sigil pouch as a symbol of his higher purpose.
Find another head to crown.
When the Harfoots find the woods they are traveling in less giving than usual, we are reminded of the falling infected leaf in the premiere episode, as well as how Greenwood the Great eventually becomes the poisonous Mirkwood in The Hobbit.
These woods have never been this bare at this time of year.
We are also reminded of one of Treebeard's lines in the movie of The Two Towers.
The withering of all woods is drawing near.
These woods are not going bare because of the rise of industry.
The old world will burn in the fires of industry.
It is nature itself that is festering. When Sadok is made to think that all of this is related to the stranger traveling with them, he is reminded of the greater good.
How can this be for the greater good? The greater good. Shut it!
It seems cold for the Harfoots to leave anyone behind, but the perils they face make it necessary for the whole.
What's it gonna take? Make a widow of somebody? Or an orphan?
Theoretical peril becomes literal peril when wolves attack the Harfoots. But that's when the stranger proves how useful he can truly be. They shall not pass. This injures the stranger's hand, which may be why Gandalf decides to start using a staff. He should start using a staff if he is, in fact, Gandalf, I should say. It's still up in the air.
And then I said to myself, how would I do that?
Unlike the Harfoots, Elendil tells his training soldiers to hold their ground. Galadriel makes a reference to stone giants, something that we see in the first Hobbit movie.
The legends are true! Giants! Stone giants!
She also knows that holding her ground and using brute strength will not help you defeat an orc. She has a lot of experience fighting them, and these children of summer have absolutely none. Elendil is wise and modest enough to ask her to help out.
But for you, I will keep it strong and simple. Stab, twist, gut.
Many of these Númenóreans may only have heard stories about elves and have never seen what an elf can truly do in a fight. There is wonder all around as Galadriel takes on multiple opponents with almost no effort, telling them that movement, maneuvering, and balance are what will put them ahead. It took 5 episodes, but we get a serious sword fight, and it is gorgeous. Isildur's friend Valandil is the only one who barely manages to scratch Galadriel, so he gets the prize of being made a lieutenant in the Sea Guard. Translated from Elvish, the name Valandil means friend of the Valar. In Tolkien's writing, it is also the name of Isildur's youngest son, in the same line of kings as Aragorn. Isildur may end up naming his future son after this specific friend. When Halbrand can't help but show off, Galadriel can't help but notice. Caiman tries to talk his father Pharazôn into stirring up opposition to the upcoming journey, but he is not impressed.
Sometimes the folly of youth is enough to make an old man weep.
No doubt it is the folly of youth, which is all men in comparison, is enough to make the elves weep.
My father would sooner die than take orders from an elf.
Caiman is worried about war, casualties, and being of service to elves. Pharazôn is an older and more slippery game player, and he's thinking much larger.
Soon we will save the low men of Middle-earth and give them the king they've long awaited, a king who will be forever in our debt.
Hey, did Tolkien ever write about the Nombrado ever going to Middle-earth?
I'm glad you asked, Doug. Now is a fine time to mention how this series is compressing and shifting the timelines in terms of Númenórean excursions to Middle-earth. Tolkien wrote that they did travel to Middle-earth on several occasions, at first because they were banned from going to Valinor, and there was nowhere else to explore. They visited Lindon, made friends with High King Gil-galad, and eventually went to war alongside him after Sauron re-emerged. Many battles ensued, and Sauron became determined to ruin them after he was forced to retreat to Mordor. The resentment of elves and the Valar mostly began after this point, with the Númenóreans being divided into the faction of elf friends and the King's Men. Some of these King's Men settled Umbar in Middle-earth, the corsairs of which are shown in the movie of Return of the King. The faithful began to be persecuted, and the Eldar no longer visited Númenor. Tar Palantir sought to regain the favor of the Valar and repent, something that is kind of touched on in this series. A major landing of Númenórean forces under Pharazôn took place later on, and while this was a supposed victory, Sauron managed to turn it to his advantage.
So which Númenórean trip to Middle-earth is this?
At this point, who knows? Elendil is involved here, which he usually isn't. That much we know. As for the rest, the series will no doubt continue to pick and choose its battles, literally. Miriel telling Tar Palantir that they are doing this to rekindle their relationship with the elves kind of tracks with all of that, but he has the gift of foresight and asks one thing of her.
Don't go.
Is he talking about Miriel specifically, or the people of Númenor in general? Tolkien didn't specifically write that Miriel never went to Middle-earth, but she has a lot of story left for her in Númenor itself. As for Númenóreans going to Middle-earth in this period, well, Galadriel might want it, but it may not be the best decision in the long run.
Not great, Bob.
Phew.
When you're right, Doug. When the stranger mumbles odd words trying to heal his hand, we couldn't help but think of this. Nori gets caught up in his magic, but again, we don't think that he intends this to happen. As Nori runs, afraid of him for the first time, the stranger seems to realize that he's gone too far. Is he really as good as Nori thought? Gil-galad makes a reference to Aule when he hosts Prince Durin in Lindon.
Your furnaces are said to be burning as bright as the eyes of Aule himself.
You'll remember that Aule is one of the Valar and the one who created the dwarves in the first place. Durin shows more decorum than the dwarves in the first Hobbit movie showed in Rivendell.
Where's the meat? Have they got any chips?
But Durin is definitely still gonna Durin.
Bit southern for elves, no?
Though Gil-galad has questions for Durin, Durin himself is able to get the upper hand on Gil-galad, telling him that the stone table he is using is made from stone that the dwarves consider sacred. You find out later that this isn't at all true. Durin just wanted to give his wife a new table. Still, it shows how little the elves truly know about dwarven culture, save for a specific stone that is most important to them.
It's good to know there's still some honor left among the elves.
It's only after this dinner that Elrond and High King Gil-galad have it out. The king doesn't like Elrond's loyalty to Durin, but Elrond doesn't like that he was used as a pawn by both Gil-galad and Celebrimbor to get the truth of the Mithril secret. Gil-galad lets Elrond and the audience know of his true concerns, having Elrond recount a legend that is thought to be apocryphal. He calls Elrond Peridel along the way, which translates to half-elven. According to the series, this legend revolves around a tree, and the roots of this tree were one of the lost Silmarils. It was the resulting light that found its way into the Misty Mountains itself and created Mithril.
Boy, there's a lot to unpack.
You ain't kidding. This story is mostly an invention of the show, but it uses enough of existing Tolkien lore that it goes down semi-smooth. Tolkien never wrote that one of the 3 Silmarils, the precious stones that held the remaining light of the 2 trees, ever found its way to the base of a tree at the top of the Misty Mountains. One of them ended up with Erendil the Mariner, one was thrown into the sea, and one was thrown into a fiery chasm. This is an age later, so the fiery chasm Silmaril might, and that's a strong might, have ended up here? I don't know. Manwë is mentioned, and he is the king of the Valar and brother to Melkor, who eventually became Morgoth. He never understood evil, and he always gave his brother too much leeway. Tolkien originally wrote of an event called the Final Battle, or the Dagor Dagorath, which is an apocalyptic event where Morgoth would return and Manwë would battle him personally. Christopher Tolkien maintained that Tolkien had abandoned the concept of this entire prophecy. A Balrog of Morgoth is both mentioned and seen, and you'll remember one of those from The Fellowship of the Ring.
A Balrog.
The look of this Balrog, complete with fiery whip, is very similar to what we see in the movies. Balrogs were Maiar spirits that were corrupted by Morgoth, and some of them still exist in Middle-earth. They don't just fight physically, they are powerful sorcerers in their own right, and in the Book of Fellowship, Gandalf trades many spells back and forth with the Balrog that the company encounters. The look of the lightning that ensnared the tree evokes the 2 trees of Valinor, as well as the image of the trees that we see in the opening credits of the show. As for this being the birth of Mithril,
it never happened.
Tolkien never directly connected Mithril to the light of the Silmarils. This is an Amazon thing. The reason that Gil-galad sent Elrond to Khazad-dûm was to discover this secret.
Then you admit the dwarves did find it, the ore containing the light of the lost Silmaril.
Elrond is determined to keep his promise to Durin, but Gil-galad lays out how all of this is connected to the eventual doom of the elves. It's not only a single leaf that has been corrupted, it's the entire tree, making us remember the poisoning of the 2 trees which we saw at the beginning of the series. Just in case the symbolism isn't clear, Gil-galad tells us what it all means. The light of the Eldar is fading. Leaving Middle-earth is not an option for Gil-galad yet, because the growing evil will spread and wipe everything out. He's not ready to abandon literally everyone on Middle-earth yet. He ties all of this into Elrond breaking his promise to Durin and telling him about the suddenly magical Mithril. He uses talk of hope to do it.
Hope is never mere, Elrond, even when it is meager.
Once again, it's about the greater good.
Shut it!
When Isildur asks Valandil to use his newfound status to get him on the expedition, he does apologize, but that's not enough. Isildur says it'll be different, but he has shown that his patterns of behavior will never really change. As Valandil tells him,
"One day, I hope you find something that you would be willing to sacrifice anything for."
his hope for Isildur will eventually manifest, no question. Isildur and Caiman have more in common than we thought, as they both end up on a ship, Caiman there to burn it, and Isildur there stowing away. After a tussle with a lantern, the ship blows up. Their lie is that Isildur saved Caiman, so Isildur begins his long streak of pulling victory from the jaws of defeat. Taking this as potential sabotage and not the work of two morons, we see Muriel now questioning the entire enterprise. Pharazôn is restraining her on one shoulder, and Galadriel is pushing her on the other. Celebrimbor talking about Elrond's father, Erendil the Mariner, is a means to push him even further. Though he calls Erendil a mortal man, he was half-elf. The legend that Celebrimbor tells is true to Tolkien, however. He wrote that Erendil and his wife, and Elrond's mother Elwing, sought out the Valar directly, imploring them to intercede in the fight against Morgoth in the War of Wrath. They accepted his plea and came to Middle-earth. On this series, Celebrimbor gives a little more detail about Elwing asking Erendil why he had to be the one to undertake this mission.
Why must it be him? Because he was the only one who could do it.
It's a cheap shot from Celebrimbor to use the history of Elrond's own father to wrest information out of him.
Hey, can you talk about Halbrand?
I was just going to. When Galadriel apologizes to Halbrand for including him on the mission without his consent, she keeps pushing him to join his people with hers. He has to remind her that his people fought against hers not that long ago.
You don't know what I did before I ended up on that raft.
Cross-cutting to the men of the Southlands currently joining with Adar lets him know that everything that Halbrand fears is still possible. History is repeating itself whether his people have a king or not. These men are only interested in survival. This was true of Halbrand before, and it's true of this contingent of Southlanders now, bowing before Adar. Halbrand doesn't tell Galadriel specifically what wicked thing he did to survive, but he believes that it is bad enough that his own people and Galadriel will cast him out. When Galadriel quotes her brother's line about darkness, Halbrand doesn't buy it. Why does she keep fighting?
Why do you keep fighting?
Because I cannot stop.
Her pain is revealed to be even deeper than that, especially after her garrison turned on her and Elrond conspired to ship her away.
And each of them acted as they did, because I believed they could no longer distinguish me from the evil I was fighting.
These lines are very telling, as are Galadriel's lines about earning peace in Middle-earth when she hands Halbrand's pouch of destiny back to him. She soon will become a part of the evil that she is fighting, though she won't be aware of it. Not only will she go along with the Rings of Power project once it finally becomes a thing, she will bear one of the 3 elven rings herself, and she will bear it for the rest of her life. Nenya, the Ring of Adamant, might give her the peace that she seeks here, but it will change her.
To bear a ring of power is to be alone.
When Waldreg meets Adar, he says he wants him and his brethren to be lifted up to take their rightful place, which are lines full of pride and based in resentment at having to be watched over by elves for so very long. When Theo asks Arondir while he is bothering to stay behind with them, it makes us think of the invented moment in the Two Towers movie when a contingent of elves selflessly arrive to aid the Rohirrim at Helm's Deep.
An alliance once existed between elves and men. We come to honor that allegiance.
Half of the Southlanders may have left, but half also stayed, and Theo was one of them. Arondir, giving hope to Theo, evokes Aragorn doing the same for a youngster before the Battle of Helm's Deep begins.
There is always hope.
It is because of this new bond that Theo shows the creepy sword hilt to Arondir, and Arondir recognizes it because he's spent countless years in this tower. He finds an image of it on the wall, and we finally see that the handle of this object has actually been in the shape of the watchtower this entire time. It is a key, which leads to something deep below the tower and was used to enslave the Southlanders. Arondir doesn't know what it specifically does, but he does know full well that Adar wants it.
Our enemy knows your son has what he needs to enact it.
The entire vibe of these scenes is completely reminiscent of the build-up to the Battle of Helm's Deep in the movie of the Two Towers, complete with looks at far-off armies approaching.
Days.
Bronwyn, losing hope and wanting to join with the enemy at the last minute, fits right in with this movie invention as well. Bronwyn says what no one else does. The elves were right to watch them all those years. They are destined for darkness, and there will be no parting with their past. She says it's how we survive, which is a direct echo to Halbrand's lines earlier in the episode. Surviving in the darkness and not in the light also evokes Adar's orcs.
Perhaps that's who we are. Who we will always be.
As Gimli says in Tolkien's writing, faithless is he that says farewell when the road darkens. Arondir knows what's on the line because he mentions how entire continents were lost during the battles with Morgoth. We learned in the prior episode that he is originally from Beleriand, and that was a continent that was lost. He knows of what he speaks. When Durin tells Elrond the truth about the table, Durin makes another reference to Aule before asking Elrond to tell him the truth in a very Durin way.
Give me the meat, and give it to me raw.
Elrond fesses up about the mithril, saying that without it, the elves have until spring. This may be the reason why Celebrimbor was so hot to get his special forge built. The fate of the elves to dwindle, diminish, and to be lost to time recalls what Elrond will say to Arwen much later in the movie of the Two Towers.
Here you will dwell, bound to your grief.
And just like that, the fate of the entire elven race is in Durin's hands. Though there is finally full honesty between Elrond and Durin, Gil-galad watches them from above. We find it all too likely that he has sold the two friends a bursting bill of goods. When Halbrand looks intently on his pouch of destiny, we know that the entire fate of Miriel's expedition rests on his decision for some reason. He parts with his destiny only to rejoin it seconds later. He parts with his blacksmith self and becomes the king that he once was. He pulls an Aragorn yet again.
Now come the days of the king.
Miriel seems to have ignored her father's advice and is armored up and on horseback. It looks like she's going along. Elendil must have forgotten that he had a daughter because both he and Isildur, who ends up being brought along as a stable sweep, ride right past Eärien. The people of Numenor, in their fine armor aboard their fine ships, are a sight to see. But that's nothing compared to the sight of Galadriel walking on the deck in her own armor, with Bear McCreary's music blasting in. We all feel like Gimli when he departs Lothlorien in Fellowship of the Ring.
Except to look upon the Lady of the Galadrim one last time.
And so it was that, way ahead of schedule, Elendil led a boatload of Númenóreans
For Middle-earth.
When the episode opens, we see Adar planting seeds. Not only is this symbolic of how Adar himself has grown new orcs all on his own, it has another symbolism for his elvish nature, something that we'll discover from another character later on. He speaks the line, which is a curious thing for an elf to say. Elves have the gift of immortality, something that was not granted to the race of men. While they are immortal, they are not invincible. Elves can be killed, or they can also die of grief. The first episode of this series told us that the elves did not have a word for death before they went to war, so this ritual likely developed during or after that time. Though he has been mutilated, there is still plenty of elf within Adar. When he addresses his children, who all hold fiery torches, it reminded us of Saruman addressing the orcs that he created in the movie of Fellowship of the Ring.
You will taste man flesh!
Unlike Saruman or Sauron, Adar talks to these orcs as brothers. They are not slaves to him, even though some will die in his service.
Some of us will fall. Some of you may die.
He says they won't be unnamed either, which is something he brings up again later in the episode. In the Third Age, Saruman's Uruk-hai had names, Ugluk being one, and even the orcs of Sauron were named in Tolkien's books occasionally, including Grishnak, Shagrat, and your mother.
Hey, you didn't do the joke right.
I had to try.
So does your mom.
Adar wants them all to be sisters and brothers, but the most notable thing of all that he wants them to have is a home. Because of the Southland's location and these orcs not being able to abide the sun, you can already tell what he has in mind. He's not going to rent them a condo block in the Poconos. He calls them Uruks multiple times here, which is getting close to the name Uruk-hai that Saruman would give his own creations in the Third Age. The word Uruk almost translates to orc from Black speech. Waldreg asks Adar about Sauron, obviously not learning his lesson from the previous episode at all, and Adar's slow turn to him makes us think once again that Adar and Sauron may not be on the best of terms. Arondir's shot that brings down the tower immediately made us think of this. While in the Two Towers, the plan was to get everyone out of the city and barricade them into a fortress, this plan ends up being the reverse. Barricade the enemy inside the fortress, and then barricade everyone else inside a village. In the first Hobbit movie, Bilbo Baggins gives his pony an entire apple. In this episode, Isildur gives his horse a bite of an apple and then keeps on eating that same apple. Sharing is caring. He then throws what's left of the apple into the sea. It doesn't hit Bill Ferny or Pippin.
Or about second, but at first.
Galadriel reminds us once again how keen the eyes of elves are.
It'll be visible to your eyes in a few moments.
She meets Isildur, who wants nothing more than to get away from Numenor. Soon enough, he'll have his wish granted permanently. He speaks of the real Numenor, which may be a reference to Valinor. Under the ban of the Valar, the race of men is forbidden to venture there. Galadriel's assurance that those lands do still exist is probably shallow comfort for the never-to-be-fulfilled Isildur. After having Isildur get back to work, Elendil reluctantly tells Galadriel that Isildur's mother drowned. This must make that hurt even more for Elendil, because if she was taken by the sea...
And the sea is always right.
Isildur's mother is never named in Tolkien's writing. When Elendil charts out their approach with Miriel, we get another good look at the Southlands thanks to the map that they use. We know that this is Mordor territory, but the location of the now ruined watchtower is very close to where Cirith Ungol will one day stand. Also prominent on this map is a certain volcano, which is, at the moment, dormant.
Doom!
Speaking of which, just like the One Ring can only be destroyed in the fires of Mount Doom, the creepy sword hilt key can't be broken apart by force, as Arondir finds out. It's going to take more than that, but at least it didn't blow him backwards. The works of Sauron are not so easily destroyed.
The ring cannot be destroyed, Gimli, son of Gloin, by any craft that we here possess.
Much like the riders of Rohan, these people enjoy putting orc heads on pikes. Arondir has the following to say to the people.
Soon the sun will set. Do your part, and I swear to you, you shall see it rise again.
This might be a bit of a stretch, but this line is very similar to one of our favorite lines in all of Tolkien. In the Silmarillion, the battle cry of the completely outnumbered Húrin during the Battle of Unnumbered Tears is Aure Entulava, day shall come again. When Theo is set to guard the women and children, we thought of how Éowyn is given a similar task in the movie of the Two Towers. He adds in this,
I can fight,
which Éowyn says earlier in the movie.
I can fight!
When Bronwyn repeats words she used to say to Theo when he was little, some of them sound familiar.
This shadow is but a small and passing thing.
Two different speeches from Samwise Gamgee come to mind, starting with this one in the Two Towers.
But in the end, it's only a passing thing, this shadow.
And the one in this scene from The Return of the King.
There's light and beauty up there that no shadow can touch.
Arondir lets us know about the seed planting thing that we saw Adar do in the opening.
It is a tradition among elves. Before the battle begins, plant one.
Once again, it is new life in defiance of death. The Valar who watches over growing things and those who tend them that Arondir mentions is very likely a reference to Yavanna, the mighty Valar who first grew all of the plants of Arda. Her husband was Aule, who we've mentioned before is the Valar who created the dwarves. Yavanna feared that the dwarves, as well as the elves and men, would cut down her trees, and she brought this issue to Manwë, who then brought it to the very top of the chain to Eru Ilúvatar, who took pity on her and created the Ents.
Look, the trees. They're moving.
Is that all she did?
Far from it. Of her many, many deeds, one of the more fun ones is this. When the Maiar who would form the Iseri were being chosen, Yavanna asked the Maiar Curumno to bring the Maiar Iwendil with them. Curumno became him,
or embrace your own destruction.
And Iwendil became him. Saruman likely regretted this later, but he wasn't about to refuse the wish of one of the Valar.
Do not speak to me of Radagast the Brown. He's a foolish fellow.
Also sent by Yavanna, your maternal figure.
No, that's still not right.
Okay. Arondir and Bronwyn steal a kiss, but is it their first? We'll need Theo to brush that hair off of his ears before we can say for certain. When the orcs slowly approached the village in the night, we immediately thought of the Uruk-hai approaching Helm's Deep. Arondir getting tossed around by this big old boy definitely made us think of Legolas meeting Bolg for the first time in the Desolation of Smaug. An orc bleeding all over Arondir for quite a long time isn't just a lovely excuse for some gore, it is a reminder to us, in case we needed one, that orc blood is black. The villagers think they've won, but really, they're all about to have a smaller version of the moment that Theoden has here.
Make safe the city!
Because of this. Though there were some orcs in that first assault, most of the attackers were Southlanders who joined with Adar in the previous episode. Adar sent them in first.
Even to a guy like me, that's cold.
Having enemies fight each other before sending in any troops of your own is classic Sauron, and apparently it's classic Adar as well. A house divided cannot stand, so having men fighting against their own is a familiar and worrying tactic. This orc is especially proud of the move.
Had to pay the toll.
But all he's really doing is making us think of this.
You gotta pay the troll toll to get in.
Arondir doesn't seem to have the talents for elvish healing that we've seen Tauriel use in The Hobbit, but that was more of a movie invention. The best they can do here is use seeds, somewhat akin to Aragorn's use of Athelas, and cauterize it back and front.
Medic!
When the men of Numenor ride with all their might to the rescue, we get another good look at their armor and helmets. Some of you viewers rightfully pointed out that the designs are similar to some designs of the men of Rohan. Helping to drive that notion home here is naturally the fact that they're charging on horses.
Ride now to Gondor!
The mysterious key serves a smaller scale story purpose in this episode in much the same way that the One Ring does. Adar wants it, he's willing to go to any lengths to get it, but Arondir has hidden it.
You have something I want.
Adar is perfectly willing to kill every single person in the room until Adar gives the key to him, which is something to remember for later. Adar calling it such a little thing also made us think of this.
It is a strange fate that we should suffer so much fear and doubt over so small a thing, such a little thing.
Theo is the one who reveals where the key is located, though he only saw Arondir heading into this building earlier, not necessarily where he hid it. Theo continues to have a connection to the key, much like Frodo Baggins and the other ring bearers have a connection to the One Ring.
It's not a healthy connection.
Definitely isn't. The way that the key is wrapped is very similar to how Radagast has wrapped up the Morgul blade in the first Hobbit movie. The men and the orcs don't hear horns, but they do hear hooves, and that means that much like the men of Rohan will do later on, the Númenóreans have come. Their battle tactics definitely evoke the Rohirrim, and Galadriel's moves on horseback instantly made us think of this. It might be an overcast day, so direct sunlight isn't bothering these orcs as much as it normally would, but symbolically, we see the Númenórean sigil of a sun, so in a roundabout way, the sun is still trouble for the orcs. Miriel, their leader, wears a helmet that also evokes the sun. Elendil, who wears a helmet that looks exactly like the ones worn by the Gondorian Citadel Guard, is saved by Halbrand in the middle of the battle. The future king of Gondor and Arnor is saved by the soon-to-be king of the Southlands. When Galadriel rides after a fleeing Adar, it is a reverse of the Black Rider chase from Fellowship. An elf is now chasing the enemy. Galadriel's whisper of Nuralim to her horse here makes us think of the Fellowship movie, where Arwen asks the same of her horse Asfaloth.
Nuralim Asfaloth!
Translated from Elvish, Nuralim means ride fast.
I always Nuralim.
I know you do.
Where are the Harfoots?
Not in this episode.
Where are the dwarves?
Also, not in this episode. When Galadriel interrogates Adar, she says that she heard stories of elves taken by Morgoth when she was a child.
Tortured, twisted, made into a new and ruined form of life.
This is true in some of Tolkien's writing, though the origin of the orcs was never firmly decided by him and is debated by Tolkien scholars to this very day. Morgoth Melkor was always involved, that much is clear. At one point, Tolkien wrote that they were created by him whole cloth in mockery of the elves. At another point, it was decided that Melkor was unable to create life himself, so he captured and twisted the elves to form what would become orcs. The Adar storyline here makes it clear that the series is going with the orcs began with corrupted and tortured elves bit from the Legendarium, something echoed by Saruman in the Fellowship movie.
They were elves once,
taken by the dark powers, tortured and mutilated.
Galadriel calls Adar and his ilk the Sons of the Dark, or the First Orcs.
We prefer Uruk.
When Adar doesn't give up the location of Sauron, Galadriel threatens him.
Perhaps we should bring our prisoners into the sunlight.
It was only a couple of scenes ago where Adar was threatening to kill a room full of people, so this scene really features two elves that have both been touched by darkness. Finrod's knife is ever present in Galadriel's hand.
After Morgoth's defeat, Sauron devoted himself to healing Middle-earth.
As he says, Sauron wanted everything in perfect order, but that sounds a lot like what this guy once said. Adar also mentions Sauron seeking to craft the power of the unseen world, which we saw remnants of in the abandoned workshop in the premiere episode. The power of this realm is something that Sauron will eventually become proficient with. The Nazgul become a part of it, and the One Ring has some of its power as well. The fact that Frodo can see the true form of the Nazgul when wearing the One Ring is an example of this. Sauron could not discover what he needed to know on his own, however, so that would lead directly to him needing to dupe the other races of Middle-earth into helping him. When he continues, he says that he and his children all come from the Master of the Secret Fire, which is a reference to the highest power in all of Tolkien, Eru Ilúvatar. The Secret Fire, or the Flame Imperishable, is the very power of creation itself. Adar isn't necessarily wrong here, as the Valar came after Eru, including Melkor. Whether Melkor created or corrupted elves into orcs, they all technically fall under the same umbrella. In Fellowship of the Ring, when Gandalf says,
I am a servant of the Secret Fire,
he is likely also referring to the Flame Imperishable. He is also making a backdoor reference to something directly related to the Rings of Power.
Oh, are we gonna see one now?
We're not, no.
I'd make one myself, but I am so small.
When Galadriel goes on a rant about exterminating orcs, making a reference to them being a mockery, Adar drops the word mirror, something often tied to Galadriel. When Arondir brings the still unwrapped sword hilt key to Theo, Theo talks about how connected he truly is to the object.
It's not just guilt, I feel. It's loss.
It made him feel powerful, which is exactly the same effect the One Ring had on so very many. Years after the One Ring was destroyed, both Bilbo and Frodo Baggins were saddened by the loss of it.
Any chance of seeing that old ring of mine again?
Sorry, Uncle. I'm afraid I lost it.
When finally unwrapped, Theo discovers
it's a fake.
Waldreg has the real key, and he uses it to do precisely what many of you thought that he would. Before we see the fallout, Elendil calms a horse, much like Aragorn calmed the horse that belonged to Theodred in the Two Towers movie.
No, either we.
Where did Elendil learn this?
From your mother.
Hey, Elendil said it. I didn't. When the mayhem that the turning of the key has unleashed starts going off all around the village, the orcs begin to chant Orodruin. It is the name of the dormant volcano in the distance, which you might know better by the name Mount Doom. Thanks to the key, it is dormant no longer, and it roars to life. It will no doubt poison the skies of this land and make the soon-to-be Mordor the ever-clouded home that Adar wants for his children. Whether by intention or by mistake, Adar has also now given Sauron something he very much needed. Celebrimbor's forge isn't built yet, but Sauron's forge just roared to life. It is within the cracks of Mount Doom that Sauron will eventually create the One Ring.
Mount Doom has sprung to life, and nothing is going well for anybody in Middle-earth. Unless you're an orc, in which case, enjoy your new home. Almost every main character in this episode is questioning their actions, from Galadriel to Theo to Nori Brandyfoot. Despite their best intentions, all of them seem to think,
I've made a huge mistake.
When Galadriel wakes up from under a pile of ash, we get our first look at the new and not improved Southlands. Though it hasn't been given the name Mordor yet, it definitely looks like the Mordor that Tolkien describes in his writing, and the Mordor that we see in the Lord of the Rings movies. Characters stumbling around and coughing repeatedly made us think of Boromir's description of the land in the Fellowship of the Ring.
The very air you breathe is a poison. poisonous fume.
Isildur, Valinor, and Queen Muriel tried to save some people from a burning house, but they pay the price for doing the right thing. Muriel gets a load of spark and ash in her face, and Isildur gets covered by the flaming debris.
Is he dead?
Well, everybody in the episode thinks he is.
That doesn't answer my question. Is he dead?
No. Isildur is a pivotal figure in Tolkien's lore, and if he was taken out of the picture, then the Lord of the Ring itself wouldn't happen.
The ring passed to Isildur, who had this one chance to destroy evil forever.
Elrond is back at playing diplomat, making promises to the dwarves. They aren't necessarily at odds with them, but they question whether they can accept Elrond's promises. King Durin remarks that Elrond has picked up a few words of Stone Tongue, and he may be referring to Khazad-dûl, the secret language of the dwarves. This language was rarely shared with any outsiders, even elf friends such as Elrond. Tolkien wrote that certain elves, such as Feanor, were able to learn Khazad-dûl, but this included the lore masters of the Noldor. Elrond could have learned some of these languages through these lore masters. Now, though the series has shown other elves condescend to Elrond because of his half-elven nature, he uses it here to his advantage.
But Elrond half-elven, and I see in elves that which they cannot see in themselves.
Now, when he says this, we see that Elrond has a wisdom that extends past that of the elves alone. This is likely why he is able to call a council of many races together in Fellowship of the Ring.
You've been summoned here to answer the threat of Mordor.
He doesn't seem to respect the other races as much as he does here, however.
They hide in their mountains seeking riches. They care nothing for the troubles of others.
King Durin talks with his son alone, and aside from another name drop of the Valar Olu, he evokes a combination of elements that we saw in the very beginning of this episode.
He crafted us of two elements, fire and rock.
When he speaks of the fire within all dwarves, which knows the truth that one day all things must be consumed, he holds the corrupted telltale leaf of Linden, the sign that the kingdom of the elves is in grave danger. His wariness not to help the elves is not unwise. It would, as we now know, require the mining of a great deal of mithril. Even though they would be mining the mithril for a good cause, he could be concerned about delving greedily and too deep. We know what happens when the dwarves of Khazad-dûm eventually do that, and it didn't result in the mountain caving in.
The dwarves delved too greedily and too deep.
You know what they awoke, and just in case you need a reminder, you'll get one towards the end of the episode.
Durin's Bane.
As far as King Durin is concerned, if the elves' time is up, it's up.
The fate of the elves was decided many ages ago by minds much wiser.
So we would say that the minds he's thinking of are the Valar, and that this is a direct contrast to how his son is thinking. King Durin sees a bigger picture and believes in the will of the Valar. Prince Durin is only concerned about helping his friend. He warns about what could happen about defying their will, and he is speaking of the Valar. And if he is speaking of the Valar, and he almost certainly is, this is a portent for a completely different storyline. There are those on this show who are all too ready to defy the Valar.
What have the Romans ever done for us?
Wait, who's the Valar?
But the Valar are the servants of the being who created the world, and they helped to create Middle-earth and all the other lands. So all it takes is one look from Durin and Disa for Elrond to realize that his proposal has been turned down.
Don't suppose I can elbow you into staying for dinner?
Gil-galad must be informed.
And they use a certain elvish word to part ways.
We say
Nombrado.
This elvish word comes directly from Tolkien, and it is heard more than a few times in the Rings movies.
Nombrado.
It's usually translated to mean farewell, though scholars would say that the literal translation is to be well. Elrond's addition of go towards goodness does not come out of nowhere, as some translations of the partial word Marie do mean goodness.
Is anyone on this show even gone towards goodness?
Not even a little bit. When Prince Durin sees this, it lets us know that Gil-galad and Celebrimbor weren't full of it when they told Elrond about what mithril would do for the elves.
Maybe make some rings out of it.
Well, there's always next season for the rings, Doug. Galadriel seems to finally realize that she's gone too far when she tells a vengeful Theo that
It is over.
in her mind, all of this is her fault. Her pursuit of vengeance led directly to it. When Elendil reunites with Queen Muriel, he is told that Isildur is dead.
Where is my son?
So he is dead.
Well, you never know what this show's gonna do, but no, he's not dead. That moment did remind us of this, though.
Where is my son?
When Galadriel gives Theo her sword, it evokes her possibly hanging up her arms and preparing to leave the battlefield. She still has Finrod's knife, but since one of the Rings of Power is in her future,
if they ever show the Rings of Power,
then she won't need a sword when it comes time for her to fight. Muriel discovering that she has gone blind is something new for the character and not something that Tolkien included in his writing. But it makes sense, however, as her father has the gift of foresight, and Muriel herself has already had visions of doom. These far-seeing visions are now in direct contrast to her regular sight. Aside from that, Muriel could continue to be figuratively blind as to what will continue happening in Numenor itself. After he caused havoc with the tree, the Harfoots are sending the stranger off on his own. Sadak references Greenwood the Great.
They call it Greenwood the Great.
Which is the large forest that will eventually become corrupted and renamed Mirkwood. Was the stranger's magic ineffective though?
It wasn't.
Well, it took time, but life begins to return to the burned out trunk. This made us think of the single white flower growing on the tree of Gondor prior to Aragorn's arrival, even though that was invented for the movie. When Nori Brandyfoot rethinks every action she's taken on the show thus far, she instantly connects us to Frodo Baggins.
I wish none of this had happened.
She's also saying this in a roundabout way.
I made a huge, tiny mistake.
When Galadriel and Theo camp for the night, she mentions how she lost her brother, and then she drops this bomb.
And my husband.
Husband.
Celeborn.
What?
Her talk of meeting Celeborn while dancing in a glade of flowers evokes how Tolkien wrote about Beron's first meeting with Luthien. Aside from that, Galadriel says that the last time she saw him, he was going off to war. In Tolkien's writing, the two of them married in the First Age, which tracks with what she says here. He certainly didn't die though, as he is present in both the books and the movies of The Lord of the Rings.
So he's dead on this show?
Well, I don't see how or why they would do that. It would be a major change from both the lore of the books and the movies, and would create a gaping inconsistency whether you're a book fan or a movie fan.
But Galadriel said that he's dead.
And the other said that Isildur is dead.
Maybe he is.
He's not, and neither is Celeborn. Our theory is that Galadriel will be reunited with Celeborn at some point, and that he could be a prisoner of Sauron or some other dark forces. She only thinks that he's dead.
Can you say Celeborn 5 times fast?
Yes, but I won't because I have nothing to prove to you. After Galadriel drops the Celebomb, it's Theo's time to take responsibility for everything bad that has happened.
I've made a huge mistake.
Galadriel's words of comfort to him show even further how taking on the burden of her brother's death and finding Sauron has become an obsession that led to disaster. It's not news to us, but she is aware of it now. When she gives him more wisdom,
there are powers beyond darkness at work in this world.
It once again brought us back to this scene from Fellowship.
There are other forces at work in this world, Frodo, besides the will of evil.
And this is probably our favorite episode for Theo as a character. That's not a reference, a symbol, or a connection. It's just something that I'm saying. When Galadriel and Theo hide from the orcs here,
what is it?
We could not think that it is composed exactly like this classic scene. There's a fair amount of sniffing in both scenes too. When Durin and Elrond go mining, Elrond comes clean about the only lie that still stands between him and Durin.
Dead in our contest. Did it?
It turns out that was yet another clever ploy by Elrond half-Elven. The Elrond-Durin friendship might be one of the best relationships on the show, and that means that our hearts are surely going to end up being broken.
I always thought you were made dwarvish for an elf.
And you are a rather elvish dwarf.
When Durin says that dwarves have secret names that are not shared by outsiders, this is also taken directly from Tolkien. This goes even deeper than the dwarf tongue not being generally known. Tolkien reveals this bit about dwarf names in the appendices of The Lord of the Rings.
Dwalin, Balin, Kili, Fili, Dori, Nori, and Ori.
And what are their real names? Well, we don't know. Gimli isn't Gimli's real name either. Tolkien very, very rarely shared a dwarf's true name.
I have a secret name.
Ooh, what is it?
It is also Doug.
Very good. Even though Durin finds a huge deposit of mithril, his father is furious. They have found it without a cave-in or an accident of any kind, which makes us think even more that King Durin is afraid of a much darker danger. Prince Durin has already said that being worthy of the name of his father is one of the deepest honors of any dwarf. It is because of this that his father pretty much disinheriting him hurts all the more. The good news for the Harfoots is that their grove has now been fully restored thanks to the Stranger. The bad news is that the Stranger's use of magic has seemingly drawn the attention of Middle-earth's worst emo folk trio. When Elendil struggles with Isildur's horse, Beric, we are reminded once again of the bond with horses that men of Westerness can achieve. Elendil has no choice but to set the horse free. And we'd bet good money that this is because the horse is the only one who senses that Isildur is still alive. He is not about to leave him behind. And even though this only happened in the movie, this definitely reminds us of the horse Brago saving Aragorn when everybody thought that he was dead. Just like everyone else in this episode, Elendil thinks over everything he's done since he pulled Galadriel from the water, and thinks,
I've made a huge mistake.
He and the Queen aren't just going to leave the surviving Southlanders to fend for themselves. A garrison will be left behind and they'll be taken care of. Now this makes sense, as in Tolkien's writing, Numenor began to have several outposts of varying size in Middle-earth. The Numenorians also traveled to Middle-earth to battle the forces of Sauron more than once, and it looks like the show is going to have them do so again based on what Queen Muriel says here.
Numenor will return.
And when they come to Middle-earth, they often fight alongside elves, so this retort makes sense too.
Then the elves will be ready.
Gil-galad is gonna love that she promised that. Now there are already old Numenorian colonies here as it turns out, as Bronwyn says that herself, Arondir, and the others will make way for Peligr. An important location in Tolkien's writing, Peligr will be a home base for the faithful of Numenor, and will eventually become the chief port of Gondor. When Largo Brandyfoot tries to pep up the Harfoots with this,
We're Harfoots! Look, we don't slay dragons, but there's one thing we can do, I warn. We stay true to each other.
We couldn't help but think of Meriadoc Brandybuck in the movie Return of the King.
I'm a hobbit, and I know I can't save Middle-earth. I just want to help my friends.
We face it, with our hearts even bigger than our feet.
Good boy, high five. This prompts a little fellowship to rise up and decide to go and help the stranger. Poppy has almost gone full Samwise Gamgee as well.
She won't be alone.
And I'm coming with you!
And soon it's fairly close to this.
Wait, we're coming too!
With Sadoc going with him as their wise leader, this new fellowship is off, and they just keep walking. Is Durin worried about failing his father? No, he's only worried about failing Elrond. His head may recognize his duty, but Disa is his heart. She's going to push him to help the elves anyway, and that will lead to them delving not greedily, but definitely deep.
That mithril belongs to us, to you and me. And together one day, we are going to dig.
Not great, Bob, because when King Durin tosses the telltale leaf into the hole before sealing up the mithril outpost, we see what is waiting for the dwarves down in the depths of Khazad-dûm. It is Durin's Bane, the Balrog of Morgoth, the one that will lay the kingdom to ruin and eventually do battle with Gandalf the Grey. So when they unleash Shadow and Flame, just like everyone else on this show has done, Durin and Disa will have only one thing to say.
I've made a huge mistake.
Oh, and in case we didn't already know, Adar says that his new orc amusement park needs a new name, and for some reason, the name is not spoken. The on-screen location title, The Southlands, changes to Mordor. Now right away, the stranger loses his symbol of goodness while traveling through Greenwood the Great. The apple represents his connection to the Harfoots and is also a reference to Twilight.
Oh. Really?
No. It could be a reference to Adam and Eve and the apple from the Tree of Knowledge, but that might be a stretch.
It's Stretch Armstrong, if you ask me.
As we have said in previous videos, Greenwood the Great is the immense forest that will eventually become corrupted and be renamed Mirkwood. The apple leads him to the three mystics, and we see that they are able to change their form as Tolkien once wrote that Sauron could do. The image of Nori, the most pure character on the show, and the one who told the stranger that he is good, takes the symbol of their connection and transforms into someone who is definitely not good at all. Speaking that he fell from the sky, much like Morgoth and Sauron once fell from grace. They want to worship and serve him because...
Tulil men noritas. Haru Sauron.
One of the opening shots of this episode may be trying to make fetch happen in that direction as well. Perhaps trying to make us think of a singular eye.
So the stranger is Sauron?
Nope, more like this.
Fake.
These three cultists think that he's Sauron, but they've been going down the wrong internet rabbit holes. Galadriel and Halbrand race to Eregion, so they are bypassing Lendon completely. Galadriel would want to avoid the High King Gil-galad, so this makes sense. When Elrond talks with Celebrimbor, we get a sense that the ticking clock that Celebrimbor put on this entire project was because of the growing danger to the elves. No one, as of yet, is whispering in his ear.
If only there was some way of doing more with less.
It sounds like he's done with the idea to use mithril to build a suit of armor around the elves.
Not a great plan.
He'll be susceptible to other ideas. The only mithril they have is the small token that Elrond was given by Prince Durin, the friendship of an elf and a dwarf that is going to be the basis of what comes next.
The Rings of Power?
Maybe, just wait and see.
We haven't seen any Rings of Power yet.
Trust me.
The sun itself began as something No bigger than the palm of my hand.
Now this is a reference to the last fiery fruit of Laurelin, one of the 2 trees of Valinor. In Tolkien's writing, the Valar Aule crafted the sun itself from this fruit, which, we'd imagine, fit in the palm of his hand. Celebrimbor wanting to match these powers not only evokes Greek myth, with him flying close to the sun, or the idea of the sun. It represents a being wanting to do something that is well past his ability. Celebrimbor is a skilled elf, but he's not a god. He's more of a mad scientist than anything.
The power of the sun in the palm of my hand.
When Elrond says that they have failed and that the elves must prepare to leave Middle-earth, we're actually reminded this is something they eventually do in the Third Age.
My people are leaving these shores.
Now this is still the Second Age though, so...
Not yet.
As Halbrand gets healed while the elves chant in Kenya, Elrond makes the one apology that he's yet to make for his political ways.
I should have never have set you on that ship. I should have trusted you.
This line about trust will be integral later on. Their talk also reminds us of one of the first scenes in this series, Galadriel making her little paper boat. Other elf children destroyed her boat out of jealousy, and later in life, Galadriel found herself literally out to sea. Elrond is metaphorically out to sea, so what are the 2 of them going to do?
The only thing we can do. Swim.
Halbrand heals very quickly, which almost makes us think that he was pretending that his injury was worse than it actually was. Now he approaches Celebrimbor like a fan, all but asking for an autograph from Time's man of the Second Age.
The Celebrimbor? He's not here, is he?
He appeals to Celebrimbor's vanity before taking a look at 3 curious gems that are conveniently set up in the workshop. The episode will confirm it later, but these 3 gems will become part of the 3 elven rings. The blue will go to Vilya, the red to Narya, and the white to Nenya.
We're getting close.
Yeah, we are. Celebrimbor continues his ambitious talk when he mentions Feanor, an elf who he has previously shown admiration for. Now, while it's true that Feanor was the most gifted smith of all the elves, his creations, the Cimmerals, led to a legacy of blood, pain, and war.
Couldn't the right alloy also amplify those qualities?
He isn't just talking about stretching out their small supply of mithril. The title of the episode is Alloyed, which, from a certain point of view, is what happens when 2 substances form a bond or an alliance. Halbrand is about to do this with Celebrimbor, and later on, Halbrand will seek to do the same with someone else. He's already found the right alloy.
Might there not be some alloy to amplify the qualities of your ore?
It's him, just say it.
Oh, that shoe hasn't dropped yet, my friend.
Call it a gift.
You'll remember that in Tolkien's writing that when Sauron duped Celebrimbor, he did so in the fair form of Anatar, the Lord of Gifts.
It is a gift.
You know you want to say it.
Yeah, I really do.
Bring me back this mighty gift.
In Numenor, Tal Palantir is close to death, and Pharazôn says that when he's gone, black flags will fill the harbor. He also makes another curious mention.
Granting him the immortality in stone that no man, not even a king, can attain in life.
Now, one of the chief reasons that many of the Númenóreans grow increasingly angry with the Valar is because they are not immortal. This was considered a gift for the race of men, with the Rue Ilúvatar only giving them mortality on purpose. Men like Pharazôn do not accept that, and their resentment will grow to the point where they will all do some really stupid things. I'll leave it at that.
Hey, what happened?
Elendil's daughter Arianne is in an art contest to capture the essence of the dying king, and thinking that he's Muriel, he says,
I know what you have been doing in the dark of night when you thought all eyes were asleep.
He goes on to say that Muriel is not yet queen, but will be, and that
if the old ways of our people are not soon restored, our island will fall.
Okay, so some things to unpack here. For one, what has Muriel been doing in the dark of night? In terms of the show, worship of Melkor may have already been happening in Númenor, and Muriel could be a part of it. Either that, or she is doing something that the Valar would not approve of, something that goes against the old ways that the king just referenced. It is the turning away from the Valar that will bring about the Great Wave, and Muriel herself has a vision of it earlier in the series. Going to Middle-earth personally could have been her way of atoning, not only for the behavior of her people, but of something she's doing herself.
But don't do as I did. I looked for too long.
Of all characters, Erwin is mistakenly sent to look into the Palantir, and no good is going to come from that. Gil-galad hits the scene with one hell of a loaded line.
One object for all Middle-earth.
You get it.
One ring to rule them all.
What kind of object are they making?
It would be smaller than previously imagined.
A ring!
Or perhaps A crown?
Oh, come on.
They plan to put this crown on Gil-galad, and it is very telling that he doesn't go all in immediately. He is suspicious from the start, and the only thing that makes him interested is the desperate situation of the elves. In Tolkien's writing, Gil-galad was never taken in by Onatar, never trusting him. Now in this version, Gil-galad is not being taken in by the plans of Celebrimbor and a low man, as he says.
His suggestions were but the key that unlocked the dam.
That sounds familiar. Celebrimbor goes too far, though.
This is a power of the unseen world.
This is what lets Galadriel know that not everything here is above board. In the premiere, she saw traces of the unseen world in Sauron's abandoned workshop, and knows not only that it is connected to him, but yet another power that should not be trusted. And not only that, but Adar pretty much said those exact words to Galadriel.
Those words, power over flesh. Where did you hear them? Was Halbrand with you?
She knows.
The entire solution in my field of view, the arc of this case, is a tragedy of errors.
When Gil-galad takes his leave, we see him holding Aegolas, his giant spear. Now, this is his weapon of choice, and the only one we see him wielding in his brief appearance in the prologue of Fellowship of the Ring. He tells Elrond this.
It is a fool's hope, Elrond.
Which immediately makes us recall this.
Just a fool's hope.
The work begins and we see Celebrimbor working closely with Halbrand. Much like how in Tolkien, Celebrimbor worked with Onatar. Celebrimbor isn't happy that he has only 3 weeks, but at least it isn't 2.
Let's do it in 2 weeks! Hey!
When Halbrand connects with Galadriel, he says this.
Someone like me, working with the elven smiths of Eregion.
A mortal man, or the former number 1 to Morgoth.
Push me to heights that no one else could have.
So, Galadriel and Halbrand form an alloy which brings out the true strength of each other. Galadriel seems pretty creeped out, but maybe it's for the greater good.
How can this be for the greater good? Shut it!
When the 3 mystics plan with the stranger, still thinking that he's Sauron, they reference the stars that he's looking for and call the constellation the Hermit's Hat. As far as we know, that's not a thing that Tolkien wrote about, but if you really squint and look at the form of these stars, it almost looks like Gandalf's signature hat.
Stretch Armstrong.
Gandalf wasn't a hermit though, so maybe not. Radagast was a hermit, and this outline looks more like his hat. But whatever, no need to put a hat on a hat. What's more important is where the mystics say these stars can be seen.
Where the stars are strange, the lands of Rhûn.
In the Council of Elrond, in the book of the Fellowship of the Ring, Aragorn says that he himself has ventured to both Rhûn and Harad, where these stars are strange. It is also where the 2 Ishtari, the Blue Wizards, once traveled, and Saruman may have gone with them. Saruman returned, but the Blue Wizards, and their Maiar names are Alatar and Palando, never came back at all.
Where you will be known at last for who you truly are.
The 3 of them hype him up as Sauron before knocking him out. As we've seen, the stranger doesn't really have control over his powers. They play more shape-shifting games when the Harfoots arrive. Sadoc gets a dagger in the chest, but look who comes to their rescue. He starts laying these fools out, at least until their leader closes their eye-crested staff to fling the stranger around a lot like this.
But you have elected the way of pain!
Now, Sadoc isn't dead yet, and he stabs one of the mystics in the foot. It made us think of Frodo stabbing an orc in the foot in Fellowship, something that the animated movie also uses.
The Shire!
It also made us think of this. Like hobbits, the Harfoots are proficient with throwing rocks. Tolkien wrote that hobbits could be lethal with rocks, and we see this depicted a few times in the movies.
A fine hit.
When Nori offers the stranger the mystic staff, he doesn't want to accept it.
I will hurt you again.
She's able to break through the mind games, saying that only he can truly show who he is.
Only you can show what you are.
It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me.
Now Gandalf, the stranger, gets up and bids the mystics return to the shadow.
Back to the shadow!
The stranger really could have gone either way here, and it mirrors Gandalf being tempted by the power of the One Ring years later.
I would use this ring from a desire to do good, but through me, it would wield a power too great and terrible to imagine.
He declares who he is through action here, and though he doesn't fully know who or what he is, he decides that he is good.
He is not Sauron.
You think? The mystics go one further, saying that he is the other and use the term Ishtar. Now, as we've already said many times, the 5 Maiar who were sent to Middle-earth were called the Istari.
I'm good.
So he's Gandalf.
Well, he's certainly one of the Istari, and he's been clad in gray this entire time. Unless this is an unusual Saruman or Radagast origin story, yes, he's Gandalf. I think that we've said that from the start, actually.
So it could be one of the blue wizards.
He's not.
How do you know?
I just do. So when this member of the Astari vanquishes the Mystics, their true form very much resembles that true ghostly form of the ring wraiths when Frodo sees them. This suggests that they themselves are of the unseen world. Using their own staff, his magic appears as a moth or a butterfly, and that could be a connection back to the Jackson movies. The staff vanishes. Now, it wasn't his first staff, and it won't be his last. Sadok dies under a swift sunrise.
We wait for you.
When we see Elendil and Miriel talking on their way back home, she references his recent losses of Isildur, or so he thinks. She makes it sound like he has no one now, and once again, his daughter is left in the dirt, as is Anarion, his other son. The show has mentioned him. Elendil also says that his name has multiple meanings. It doesn't just reference the stars. In Tolkien and in this series, his name also means elf friend, and this is why he pulled Galadriel from the water. It is why Miriel says he follows the way of the faithful.
If the cost cannot be known, and trusting that in the end it will be worth it.
Elendil has a long way to go, but he's already chosen his path.
There are other forces at work in this world, Frodo, besides the will of evil.
He has suffered, but like the stranger, Elendil's actions define him.
We have little choice then but to keep serving.
The black banners are hung all over Numenor, which tells all of them that the king has died. As he prophesies to her before she left, Miriel is now physically left in darkness.
All that awaits you there, darkness.
She may be metaphorically blind to the dangers ahead because even though she has a strong ally in Elendil, we would all do well to pay close attention to this guy. He looks way too happy.
Not great, Bob.
When Celebrimbor gets frustrated, the ever-helpful Halbrand has a suggestion.
Supposing we've been using too much force.
The alloy, or union, shouldn't be forced. It should be drawn or coaxed together. While Morgoth was a creature of pure force, Sauron is not, at least not at first. He was cunning and devious, and as we've said, he used a needle instead of a hammer. He was definitely one to draw and coax until the time was right. So Columbo Galadriel has discovered that Halbrand's Lost King story is just Aragorn fanfiction, right as he excitedly tells her that they have decided to make two of something smaller.
I told you I found it on a dead man.
He has told no real lies. Galadriel saved him on the raft, and he wanted to remain in Numenor and not leave. And while he did fight with her in the Southlands, they were fighting against Adar.
Against your enemy. And mine.
His reference to being awake since before the breaking of the First Silence confirms that he was once a Maiar.
In that time, I have had many names.
The entry into his mind games with Galadriel evoke a reverse of this.
If you do not find a way, no one will.
He uses multiple forms, with her brother Finrod being the first.
My task was to ensure peace.
And we've heard this before.
He was seeking a power, not to destroy Middle-earth, but to heal it.
When they appear on the raft once more, Halbrand says that after the defeat of Morgoth, he felt the light of the One again. Now this could be a reference to Eru Ilúvatar, the highest being in all of Tolkien, and this man is now trying to heal everything that he had helped Morgoth ruin as a misguided attempt to atone. His truth parade continues. He did tell Galadriel that he had done evil. He told her that giving enemies a way to master their fear can be a useful tactic. The thing we didn't see coming was that he wasn't tricking Galadriel all this time. He was trying to seduce her. He wanted the two of them to be alloyed. Here is what he really wants, taking a page from a different playbook than we originally thought.
Together, you and I can rule the galaxy. Make things the way we want them to be.
He uses very choice words.
I would make you a queen.
In place of a Dark Lord, you would have a queen!
Stronger than the foundations of the earth.
Stronger than the foundations of the earth!
Even Galadriel's look in the watery reflection evokes what she looks like when she is tempted by the One Ring, and what she would become if she wielded it.
You bind me to the light, and I bind you to power.
With their powers combined, they can save this Middle-earth.
Save. Or rule.
He sees no difference, and that's the problem.
Well, if it works.
The elves weren't wrong when they thought that Galadriel would bring the very evil they were fighting back to them, but it did only happen because they tried to cast her out. Ultimately,
Sauron lives because of you!
Thank you.
It's been a long road getting from there to here.
It's been a long time.
But now we can say it. Halbrand was, and is, Sauron. When Elrond wakes Galadriel from her vision, she almost attacks him, reminding us of this. When Galadriel and Elrond go back to Celebrimbor, they mention the Glanduin, which was the river that Galadriel was just in. In Tolkien, the Glanduin formed the southern border of Eregion. Now, she doesn't say who Halbrand really is, and though we expect her to object to the entire project, she doesn't.
We must make 3.
Why 3?
Triples makes it safe. Now, triples is best.
As she says, 1 will always corrupt. The story of the One Ring is proof enough of that. 2 will divide, which is what Sauron wanted.
But with 3, there is balance.
When Galadriel says that the powers they are about to forge must be by the elves alone, it tracks with the history of the 3 elven rings in Tolkien. Sauron did not make them, and he never touched them. One of the chief dangers of Sauron regaining the One Ring in the Third Age is that he would have been able to undo everything that the 3 rings accomplished. They would not be hidden any longer, and they'd be out in the open. A big difference here is that in Tolkien, the elven rings came last, not first, and Gandalf shouldn't really be here at all, so we're already off to the races. To move on to the future, Galadriel will have to let go of her past.
I need gold and silver from Valinor.
She'll have to give up Finrod's dagger, and with it will likely be the last vestige of the warrior Galadriel. She's already given up her sword, and this dagger has weighed on her like a prologue of concrete. It's time for her to let it go.
True creation requires sacrifice.
If you're going to make rings of power, you really should only mix your mithril with gold and silver from Valinor.
Spared no expense.
When Nori and the stranger talk back in Harfoot Central, she asks what the mystics meant when they called him Istar.
Wizard.
We thought so, but thank you.
Wizard.
Now this entire conversation is very similar to conversations that Frodo and Gandalf have. This line.
Betimes our paths are laid before us by powers greater than our own.
Once again evokes a line that we've already quoted in this very video.
There are other forces at work in this world, Frodo, besides the will of evil.
The stranger also adds,
alone it's just a journey. No adventures. They must be shared.
Which directly complements this.
I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure.
It's not in the same area of Middle-earth, but this image of the stranger on the hill definitely looks like the hill that Bag End is located on, with the large tree on top. It's not the same location at all, but it gives us a similar feeling. As she was destined to from the start, Nori is off on an adventure with the stranger like a true Baggins.
I'm going on an adventure! Will she see the other Harfoots again?
I mean, I think so. Poppy is their new trail finder, and we've come to really love both her and the rest of them. It would be great to see them settle in the Shire a few seasons down the line.
Well, Nori, be careful.
No.
You'll be bold.
I will also be bold.
Nori also says that she'll be back, so there's that. She also echoes this line from Gandalf.
But you're only quite a little fellow. In a wide world, after all.
When she says this.
The world's not that wide, Poppy. It's just that we're so bleeding small.
They are so bleeding small.
Nori doesn't have any idea which way they're going.
No, I do not know the way.
But the stranger has a way forward.
When in doubt, Eleanor Brandyfoot. Always follow your nose.
Come on.
If you die, always follow your nose.
He is Gandalf, the state rests.
I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me.
When Elrond drops the mithril into the molten alloy, it is a slight reversal of the One Ring falling into the fires of Mount Doom. This is creation and not destruction, however, and the shred of mithril creates a slit in the fire image that looks something like the Eye of Sauron. The ring-making sequence has very similar shots to the sequence at the very start of the Fellowship of the Ring, and Celebrimbor looks pleased with himself.
Give my creation!
Elrond discovers the secret of Halbrand, but he doesn't put a stop to anything or tell anyone. He only shares a knowing place with Galadriel, making us recall a line that Galadriel telepathically shared with him in the movie The Two Towers.
It is the risk we all took.
At long last, Nenya, Vilya, and Narya. In Tolkien's writing, Nenya was given to Galadriel, and it was never worn by anyone else. Now, because of her influence here, we can see the series going that way. It would be odd if Nenya was given to anybody else. Vilya will likely be given to Gil-galad. Not only is he the High King of the Elves, but it's also what Tolkien wrote. And we know that Gil-galad perishes in the Battle of the Last Alliance, so Vilya eventually gets passed on to Elrond. As for Narya, Tolkien has it originally given to Círdan. So if Círdan does not keep Narya, he passes it on to Gandalf when he first arrives in the Third Age. Círdan sensed that Gandalf would have need of it, and wow, was he right about that. Gandalf is almost certainly already here, and Círdan is being held in the same locker where Celeborn, Anarion, and Tom Bombadil are being kept. So it'll be interesting to see how the series proceeds to play this out. These rings were made to heal or preserve, not to rule or conquer. Both Rivendell and Lothlorien came to be with the assistance of these rings. All right, so here you go, Doug. 3 rings of power.
What about the 7 and the 9?
Seasons 2, 3, 4, and 5, I imagine. Sauron now knows what he needs to know about ringsmithing, and Mount Doom, reflected in his eye, definitely represents the flaming eye that he will eventually become.
One does not simply walk into Mordor.
Unless you're Halbrand Sauron von Sauron the First, in which case you can strut right in. We're sure he'll thank Adar for his new army of orcs before killing him, and he'll do away with any kind of orc freedom too. Soon enough, every orc in Mordor will be singing like this.
Where there's a wind, we don't wanna go to war today.
His walk towards Mount Doom is a lot like Frodo and Sam's descent many years later. Much like Peter Jackson's movies, the season ends with a song. Series composer Bear McCree worked with Fiona Apple on the tune, which takes its lyrics directly from Tolkien's famous verses about the Rings of Power, in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. Though this series finale answered a lot of questions, especially the Halbrand Sauron mystery box, there is still a lot left for future seasons. We've seen the 3, but now it's time to see the 7, the 9, and the 1. Sauron will return to Numenor in some form, and will surely visit the dwarves as well. Now we're still wondering about Celeborn, and who knows what the stranger in Nori will find en route. Some of the biggest questions of all, though.
But still, where did the lighter fluid come from?
To say nothing of...
What does God need with a starship?
And also, I think we're done now. I think you're right. Nobody goes off trail and nobody walks alone.
Alright, well that was our complete breakdown of Rings of Power Season 1. Thank you so much for watching, and let us know other series that you would like to see a complete Easter egg breakdown of. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For Screen Crush, I'm Colton Ogburn.